What's up, Earthrockers? It's your boy Shovatar here to finally talk about Order of Ecclesia, and there's so much to say, I really don't even know where to start. This game grew on me like almost no other Castlevania game I've played, and I'm going to elaborate on that, but for now I think I'm actually going to clam up and let the voiceover do its thing.
To life, time and again, since the ancient Middle Ages, the evil Lord Dracula has driven people to terror. Each time Dracula returned from the dead, the Belmont clan fought him in the shadows, wielding the Holy Whip. Through their efforts, humanity avoided the darkness, securing prosperity. But early in the 19th century, having lost their ability to resist the darkness, those in positions of power at the time began to search for new ways to counter Dracula. Our organization, Ecclesia, was born then as one of those countermeasures. Many organizations were established with the same goal, and day after day, they conducted their studies diligently. But each was dissolved when they failed to produce satisfactory results. But that was when Barlow, the leader of Ecclesia, finally made a surprising breakthrough that could stand up against Dracula.
Alright, let's give it up for the narrator man. Yes, that right there is the basic plot of the game. The premise, I should say, not the plot. The background setup. So I guess because nothing gameplay-wise is going to happen for a little bit, I suppose I'll start off talking about the story, although the story is tough to talk about at the start because there's a couple twists and turns further down the line that kind of change the nature of a lot of what happens, and it's tricky to talk about the story without talking about them because they are so central. But for now, I'll just say that I kind of like the premise of the game. It's very different, and Order of Ecclesia has this persistent ability to synthesize very new elements with very old elements of Castlevania, where Order of Ecclesia is not really like any other game in the series in terms of its like gameplay and its systems. So I think having such a weird premise that's very different from what came before it makes sense. For context, I suppose, I'll try to keep my comparisons mostly with the rest of the DS trilogy, but I think inevitably I'm going to end up making comparisons to other games post-Symphony of the Night, and some games pre-Symphony of the Night, which I'll get to. But the premise, generally speaking, in the DS trilogy is that Dracula's castle shows up, the church sends people to go deal with it, or in the case of Dawn of Sorrow, Soma Cruz gets roped into going and dealing with it. Here, Dracula's castle is not around, and this organization, Ecclesia, is basically like... It's like this is the church, right? This is the people who know about Dracula and whose job it is to try to make sure Dracula doesn't come back. And if you're curious what the word Ecclesia means, Ecclesiastes is a term that refers to the study of churches. I think the word Ecclesia is a Latin term that means like assembly or gathering, but is meant colloquially, or is meant rather... The context in which it's used is to refer to churches, so I guess in case anybody was curious about that. It's a strange thing to establish, but it's also in the context of the series, but it's also a logical thing to establish, because something I said all the way back in my Aria of Sorrow commentary, something I noticed, was that Soma Cruz doesn't know anything about Dracula. Or no, he's heard of Dracula, but he doesn't think that Dracula really exists, which I remember thinking at the time was something of a stretch in credibility, because if you recall all the way back in Rondo of Blood opens with giant rock men and zombies attacking a town in Eastern Europe. Now, I can believe that if Dracula was only ever sequestered within his haunted castle, and it was kind of like a weird local thing that never really spilled over anywhere else, that Dracula could have conceivably disappeared into the mists of legend. But if he was sending zombies to attack a town, I think some historian would have written that down. So the notion that Dracula is a secret and that his existence is a secret never quite struck me as believable. It makes much more sense to me that, and I think that the conceit of Order of Ecclesia is that the Order of Ecclesia is a clandestine secret order, and that but they don't try to establish that like Dracula himself is a secret at this point in time. I mean, it could be a thing where like Dracula disappeared into the mists of legend. I get that idea because Aria of Sorrow takes place in 2030 something, but some things can't really disappear into the mists of legend. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm going off on a semi-related, not very interesting tangent because, as I said before, there's not really very much for me to talk about at the start. I like this little opening, but I do have a bit of a... I mean, it's effective for how it sets up the way that things change later in the story. Why am I not... Hit the button. Okay. Okay, you know what? Actually, this is a good opportunity to talk about something. So what happened there is that I had this consistent problem with the emulator, and I don't know what causes this, but if I didn't make any inputs for a long amount of time, for like a long enough amount of time, the emulator would get confused and would like not initially register my later inputs. Like, so what happened back there was I was letting the text play out on the screen and just letting it fill up the box. And then, but because I'd spent so long not hitting any buttons, when I did finally hit the button to move the dialogue along, it didn't like register that I was doing it. And that actually became problematic during some of the platforming areas in the very late game, which I'm going to point out at the time when we get there. But that's a fair ways down the path. Oh shit, he's got a gun. I will say one thing about Order of Ecclesia the story that I can talk about now, is that one of the criticisms that I levied most consistently at Aria and Dawn of Sorrow was that they had a bloated cast with lots of characters who don't really do anything and who don't really need to be there. Order of Ecclesia definitely pares it down to the absolute basics, where it's basically there are just three characters. It's Barlow, Albus, and Shanoa. Those are basically the only characters throughout the entire story. And that's fine, because I wouldn't want an Aria/Dawn of Sorrow problem. But it does create this weird situation where Ecclesia is supposed to be this big secret organization, but like Shanoa and Albus apparently are the only people who work for it, or the only people who are like involved in this whole like glyph study thing. So it seems a little bit... I guess we're just supposed to infer that there might be other people involved in Ecclesia, but that they're not relevant, or they're not around, or they're not... whatever. I wouldn't want them to include characters just for the purpose of including characters, but a little bit of clarification on what exactly the scale of Ecclesia is might have been appreciated. But that's a very, very small, very minor complaint. And something that you may notice if you've been reading the dialogue is that Shanoa now has amnesia. And one issue I have with the intro of Order of Ecclesia is the fact that it might have been more effective to just start off here, basically, so that way she doesn't know what happened before she lost her memories, and then also the player doesn't know what happened before she lost her memories. But the way that it works out in reality is... the way that it works out in the game is that you don't really get that much information about what things were like for her before the amnesia anyway, so I do think it still is... it's fine. It's just like another little tiny quirk, another little tiny thing that could have been improved. And so now I have a chance to talk about the glyph system. The glyph system is really interesting. It's something that I found very annoying at first, but the more I played the game and the more accustomed I became to it, the more I really warmed up to it. So something that Order of Ecclesia goes back to is that in Portrait of Ruin and then in Dawn of Sorrow, I went out of my way to get either weapons that were like whip weapons with a very long range, or two-handed sword weapons with like a very slow swing speed, and then like a relatively long range, and then a big overhand component. Order of Ecclesia, you're back to like Symphony of the Night / Aria of Sorrow style. You have a one-handed sword, shorter range. That is going to change further down the line because there are different weapons in Order of Ecclesia, and I'm gonna talk about that. But I just want to talk about the early game for now. In the early game, you're kind of stuck with the rapier, which, you know, again, is not really what I'm used to, and not really what I like, because I had spent the past two games that I played the shit out of, becoming accustomed to a different style of combat. But more generally, to pull back a little bit, I want to talk more about like the glyph system and the way that Order of Ecclesia implements resources. Games since Symphony of the Night struggled to implement both a magic system and also maintain the heart's currency ammunition system that was present in the classic games. And in Symphony of the Night, that kind of created an issue where Alucard has magic in Symphony of the Night, and it's not like his magic is not useful, because it is. Tetraspirit is incredibly useful, but it does become superfluous. Like you can very easily go through the entirety of Symphony of the Night and never use magic for anything except like your bat form or your mist form or something like that, right? And then in Circle of the Moon, they implemented regular sub-weapons and then the DSS system, which worked in terms of making both resources important, but the problem with Circle of the Moon's double resource system was the fact that the Game Boy Advance just doesn't have enough buttons. Because you have all these different combos of DSS cards that you would want to utilize, but if you want to swap between them, you have to like go into the menu and fuck around, and there were just so many different DSS cards you could choose from, you didn't have a choice. Harmony of Dissonance simplified the magic system so that your magic spells available were based on the sub-weapons you had and how far through the game you were, because different types of magic became available at different points in the game. And so you had basic sub-weapons, and then you had magic. They used the magic meter system. And the magic was simplified enough that you could swap between the different spells with button inputs instead of having to do any menuing. But at the same time, and it created like this, you had more of a varied arsenal, but you also couldn't use magic and sub-weapons at the same time. You had to swap between them. So and then in Aria of Sorrow, they just got rid of the hearts entirely, and it's like you just have a magic bar, and that's what you have. And then Portrait of Ruin and Dawn of Sorrow perpetuated that. And so what I'm saying basically is that Castlevania games had this issue where they had two types of resources, and they didn't quite know how to consolidate them. They didn't quite know how to implement them into the games themselves. Order of Ecclesia takes an interesting and very unexpected route with this, which is that they bring hearts back in as their own separate currency, but the hearts are only ever used for those glyph unions, which are basically like your super attacks. They're not as powerful as like item crashes in Rondo and Dia and Dracula X. Like, they're not going to clear out the whole screen or anything like that, but they are very powerful, and it's an interesting way to make hearts valuable, which is something that I think I don't want to say necessarily that Harmony of Dissonance struggled to do that, but it's a thing that you have to be very careful about, because you want to incentivize... Basically, the way to make hearts valuable is just incentivize their constant use, right? Make it so that if you want the player to always want hearts, make it so that they always want to spend hearts, right? So that way they always want to get them back. And in order to do that, you need to create situations in which the player really wants to use those hearts. And I think what Harmony of Dissonance accomplished that fairly well, I would say. Most of that, the reason I'm hesitant has to do with my specific experience with Harmony of Dissonance, where I used the Bible most of the time, which was mostly about hitting enemies that were like evasive. So most of the time I didn't really need to use it, but I would say generally speaking, Harmony of Dissonance did a pretty good job with it. Order of Ecclesia does an even better job, where one of the criticisms people levy against post Symphony of the Night Castlevanias, Egavanias, Metroidvanias, whatever you want to call them, is that they're too easy. And this is both true and not true. It's true in the sense that if you just play through the base difficulties of every game post Symphony of the Night, you are not going to have the same kind of challenging experience that you have if you sit down and play like Bloodlines, right? Or like Dracula X at base difficulty, or basically any of the classic Castlevania games. But Portrait of Ruin and Order of Ecclesia both implemented challenge modes that I would say are harder than anything present in the classic games. I'm talking about hard max level 1, which I'm not going to be playing, because I don't really like damage sponge enemies, which if you're playing level 1, there's no, this is a very, like, specific tangent, but I'm just going to get this out of the way. In Portrait of Ruin, I did hard max level 1 because there were systems in place that allowed you to go into a hard max level 1 run with existing buffs and all your offensive stats. There's no equivalent to that in Order of Ecclesia, so hard max level 1 was not attractive to me, and I just did hard max level 50. Anyway, to get back to the heart system, the reason I bring all this up, and I'm talking about difficulty, is because Order of Ecclesia is difficult enough, in my opinion, to very often incentivize the use of glyph unions. If the game was super easy, and you could solve every problem smoothly with just your default weapons, then the implementation of these like glyph union super attacks would be pointless, right? But what Order of Ecclesia did is they made the boss fights very threatening, even on normal difficulty. Portrait of Ruin did something similar, where I would say the boss fights in Portrait of Ruin on normal were pretty tough, especially in the late game. But Order of Ecclesia like really amps that up, where every boss in the game is probably gonna like four-shot you, depending on the boss. There's definitely some exceptions. But the point is that making the bosses really hard basically gives the player a very obvious opportunity to, like, okay, this is when you use your glyph unions, right? Like, this is where you kill this boss as quickly as possible because he's so dangerous. And that means that your hearts now always have value, because now you're always thinking about, how am I going to kill the next boss like as fast as I possibly can, which is very good. And I like it when this is going to sound stupid and it's going to sound obvious, but I like it when games are designed in such a way that like there's thought put into them. You know what I mean? Like they thought about making glyph. I feel like the fact that the bosses are so hard is a direct result of the implementation of the glyph union system. And what's interesting too, and this is what I mean when I talk about Order of Ecclesia synthesizing old and new ideas, is that the concept of hearts being utilized as like super weapons is a very old concept. Like if you go back to the old Castlevania games, yes, you could kill most enemies with your whip, but sub-weapons were like really important. Like the entirety, I'm thinking about Dracula's Curse right now. Like the whole structure of like a route through Dracula's Curse. And when I say route, I mean like how you go through the levels, what you decide to do. It's all based off of like sub-weapon availability. In some cases, sub-weapons literally let you just like kill bosses without even breaking a sweat, like Holy Water in C1 and C3. Or even the Cross in fucking Chronicles. Like cheeses the Medusa boss. So the idea of hearts being used as a currency for like your super weapons is actually kind of a more dramatic implementation of an older idea. That's not to say the glyph unions are only useful in boss fights, although I think that for most casual players going through the game the first time, that's probably what you would use them for. That's like the most obvious use, and it's a perfectly fine use. Like that's kind of what they're there for. But something that I really tried to go out of my way to do when I played through it, when I like started really optimizing these runs, was utilize glyph unions as much as I possibly could, even in situations that did not involve boss fights. And the way that that's structured is that something Order of Ecclesia does that Portrait of Ruin did, which I probably should have emphasized more because I complained about it so much in Aria and Dawn of Sorrow, is that Order of Ecclesia keeps the energy tanks and MP expansions and from Portrait of Ruin, but also has heart expansions. And those heart expansions are super important because not only do they increase your max hearts, they also restore all your hearts, right? So, and the reason that's so important is because the presence of those items out in the world creates these set points where it's like, okay, optimally, you want to get to each of these heart expansion items with like 0 hearts, right? Because they're going to restore all of your hearts, whether you have 0 hearts or whether you have, or whether you've only like used 1 glyph union, right? So what you want to do is you want to use as many glyph unions as you can before you get to those heart expansion placements. And this is a very like high level, like, well, I shouldn't say high level, it sounds a little bit egotistical. This is a very like advanced thing. This is the kind of thing you would do if you were like playing the game over and over again like I was, but this is the kind of thing I find fun. I find like optimizing things fun, making sure that I'm using as many resources as I can optimally. So there's a way to use the glyph unions that is both like acceptable and casual, which is just like to use them for boss fights, and most of the other time just not really think about them. But if you are playing the game enough to remember where the heart expansions are, now you can use them in a way that's more you can use them way more aggressively, because now you know I'm going to have full hearts after this point, so I don't have to worry about like not having hearts when I want them, because I know that this heart expansion is coming up. So that's the heart system. And I've talked so much about the heart system that I've barely talked about the glyph system. And the heart system and the glyph system are intertwined in that what glyph union you utilize when you hit up and B or up and X or Y. I think of it as up and B. I'm probably just going to say up and B because that's what it is in every other Castlevania game. Is dependent on the glyphs that you have equipped in your left and your right hands. And I should talk a little bit about the left-right hand thing, and part of why the glyph system kind of wore on me at first is, this is just like a personal thing. I don't really like dual wielding conceptually. I think it's a little like, I mean, the Japanese love it, but I don't. I prefer like one big weapon with a lot of coverage, and just kind of aesthetically, conceptually, I prefer like two-handers, like just like big weapons. So that was kind of annoying to me that they were basically not really forcing you to dual wield, but like it's like now you're the dual wield character. Yeah, whatever. More importantly than my aesthetic objections is the fact that, as you saw in the tutorial, the way that you're supposed to take advantage of the dual wield system is rapidly hitting the 2 attack buttons that correspond to your 2 different weapons in your 2 different hands. Now that's fine, but that kind of has a bit of a learning curve, and the problem with like the dual wield rapid fire attacks, like left right left right left right, is that it plants you on the floor, and that was a real big problem for me. Because something that I had become accustomed to throughout playing Portrait of Ruin and Dawn of Sorrow was really taking advantage of the full air control that these later Castlevania games have to do a lot of attacks in the air. And this is something that I brought up before, but I'm going to have to talk about it again because it is so, like, central. The fact that you have full air control in these late Castlevania games means that you are attacking in the air is like really good, because it means that while you're executing your attack animation, you can micromanage your horizontal position and move yourself into like whatever position you want. And you can even air strafe forward as the attack is winding up, and then after the attack has hit, you can like air strafe back again. Or you can like jump in place, wind up an attack, and then air strafe away from your enemy while the attack while the animation is being like carried out and the attack is being executed towards your enemy. So like jumping while attacking is really, really important, and it's something that I do like all the time in Portrait of Ruin and Dawn of Sorrow for the reason that I just explained. But dual wielding, like the dual wield rapid fire stuff, locks you onto the floor, so you can't really. It's just a very different way of fully taking advantage of your like melee weapon damage potential than what I had become accustomed to. So, and it makes it's really not super fun to be like locked in place like that when you're trying to deal damage. So, I didn't really like that system at first, is what I'm saying. and I still don't really like it, but the thing about it is that it's only really relevant in the early game, and this is a large-scale thing that I'm going to mention. I mean, as you can see a couple times, like, I was comfortable enough at this point to do, like, that right there, where I jumped and I could, like, hit both attack weapons, both attack buttons at the same time to kill that Metroid really fast, but it's tricky. Like, it's trickier than if I just had a fucking two-hander, I could just, like, hit that guy out of the sky. And another problem that I do have to bring up, because it would be hypocritical of me not to mention it, is that Order of Ecclesia, like I said, synthesizes old and new ideas, and it's old and new, old good ideas, and then new good ideas and new bad ideas. And one of the bad ideas that it carries over from Aria and Dawn of Sorrow is that some of your tools you can only get from weapon drops that are random. Like right there, the sword that I have now, that like kind of overhand sword, that would have been so useful to have throughout the first 2 screens of the Ruvos Forest. And the only reason I didn't get it earlier is because it just happened not to drop from the sword skeleton guys in the monastery or earlier in the level. So it's very frustrating to be denied a weapon or tool that you might want to have just because you didn't get lucky. Like, that's very frustrating to me. And I notice it every single time, where it's like, well, okay, I guess I don't get early fucking sword in this run. Great. Like, it just sucks. Same thing with the axe. The axe armors can give you an axe weapon which behaves just like the axe sub-weapon in other Castlevania games, but again, and it's really good for dealing with those Metroids, but again, it's like a random drop. So it's like, well, what, like, and it just doesn't make sense. It's like why don't just fucking give it to me? Like just have them drop it every time. Like, who fucking cares? Well, okay, you couldn't have them drop it every time because then the screen would become like cluttered with glyphs. And actually, a fun little touch they did is they absorbing a glyph gives you 10 hearts, and that's important because it means that if an enemy happens to randomly drop a glyph that you already had, it's not totally useless. That was a concept, that was something that Aria and Dawn of Sorrow, like, kind of struggled to figure out how to do anything with. Dawn of Sorrow had an absolutely terrible idea, which was making certain soul benefits stack. Like, there was a soul that gave you, like, a passive, like, +4 benefit to strength, and then that could stack up to, like, 9 times, so it's like the luckier you got, the better you were, which is a really stupid idea. In my opinion, anyway. I just have a problem with those kinds of RNG mechanics. Order of Ecclesia was much more reasonable about it, because I think what the devs wanted was they didn't want, if a glyph drops that you already have, they didn't want it to feel like it was pointless, or like you don't get any benefit from it. So the way that it works out in reality is that instead of a random glyph drop, a random recurrent glyph drop randomly making you like way stronger, it just randomly gives you 10 hearts, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. Because it encourages further use of the Glyph Union thing, and to kind of swing back to the Glyph Union thing for... What am I doing? Oh, I'm buying some armor. This is not really necessary. Yeah, I actually... I'm surprised I'm doing this. You can go through the whole game... Well, if it's your first time playing through the game, you're going to want to visit this guy plenty of times to get items from him, but if it's your... But for me, I probably never needed to talk to this guy, because well, actually, no, there's some armor I'd probably want to buy just to be safe. Yeah, no, this is fine, and I'm going to talk more about the villagers and why the villagers matter in a little bit. I still have to get through talking about all the other, like, central systems of the game. Yeah, further encourages use of the Glyph Union system, because it's like, hey, you know, you could randomly get 10 hearts whenever, so why not just use a Glyph Union just in case you have a way to take advantage of that. And that's fine, because like, whenever you introduce, like, a super attack in any video game, I don't know about you guys, but my impulse is always to, like, severely underutilize it in the game, because I worry about, like, oh, well, what if I need this later? Excuse me. Like, this is a, you know, common phenomenon in any game where you have, like, a special resource or, like, limited use items. You're like, what if I need it later? I don't want to use it. And I welcome anything that sort of mitigates that instinct. And here we have the giant skeleton boss fight, which is the first of many, which is another example of a problem that I think I started talking about before but never quite finished, which is that Order of Ecclesia has an opposite problem to Symphony of the Night. Symphony of the Night has a really great first half. Because Order of Ecclesia, like Symphony of the Night, kind of has like a first part and then like a second part where the game changes. Symphony of the Night had a really great first part, but the second half of Symphony of the Night, in my opinion, like the whole reverse castle, really drags. A big part of it is the fact that you have to flap around the whole reverse castle in your slow-ass bat form. Some enemy placements, the repetitive, like it's the same, like a really not very good music track playing for like 60% of the whole castle. Symphony of the Night's reverse castle is definitely not as good as the first half. Order of Ecclesia, opposite. First part of the game, not as good as the second part of the game, and almost all the problems with the game that are present in the early game. And this giant skeleton boss fight is bad. And it doesn't look bad, because I did it correctly there, but there's this consistent problem with certain enemies in Order of Ecclesia, which is that they just fucking walk at you. Like, they'll just walk into you, and the reason that's so frustrating is because, I mean, there it works out because they set up the magnet points to give you a way to get around him, but the problem is that you have so little time between you have so little time to like attack him between magnet points. Or between when you have to use the magnet points to get over his head, because if you wait too long, his head will, like, the top of his skull will, like, clip your foot if you try to use the magnet points to leap over him. I didn't even talk about the magnet point thing. I think that's pretty cool. I think that it does ultimately just boil down to, like, a gimmick. Like, it's not really applicable in normal gameplay. But as far as movement gimmicks in Castlevania games go, I mean, God knows I've seen worse. And I think it was their way of making the early boss fights more interesting than just, like, what early boss fights in Castlevania games usually are, which is you just kind of hit them and they die. Or if you're Portrait of Ruin, you make the fucking Dullahan, like, the hardest boss in the whole game. That's an exaggeration, but a very difficult boss fight. That's kind of a nice balance, where the fight's not hard, but it's not hard contingent on you learning this new tool that they gave you. So that's fine. My problem really is with the giant skeleton, the fact that he just, like, walks into you, and then he just, like, spends the whole fight walking towards you. It's like a totally brain-dead way of making an enemy difficult to fight, because it creates this, like, the enemy doesn't have any patterns you have to deal with. He doesn't have any, like, and there's no like, interesting interplay going on. It's just straight up, like, he just fucking walks into you. And it reminds me of something that I talked about a long time ago. When I made my Simon's Quest video, I talked about a fan game that had recently been released called Castlevania Chronicles 2 Simon's Quest or something like that. It was basically like Simon's Quest reimagined. And I remember at the time I dropped that fucking game like a sack of bricks because the boss AI was so infuriating, because every single boss would just fucking walk at you. Like, every boss is like that. There's also, like, some real, like, dumb shit in that game, too. Like, the fucking fishmen in the first bridge, just, like, I couldn't figure out how to not get hit by them, not get knocked into the water by them fucking jumping out at me. Anyway, and at the time, when I talked about this fan game, I remember, like, making some snide, like, smart-ass comment about, like, oh, I guess it's pretty easy to fucking make a boss hard by just programming it to just fucking walk at the player the whole time. But I didn't realize that what that was just AI from Order of Ecclesia. I mean, the difference is that Shno is much better at getting around enemies that just walk towards her than Simon in Chronicles 2 was, but that was funny that I was, like, shit-talking them as if they had done that, but really most of that Castlevania Chronicles 2 Simon's Quest game is sort of like stuff taken from Order of Ecclesia, which is fine. I'm not saying, I mean, it's still a really impressive thing that they did. But that brings me to an interesting point, which is one of the most fascinating things about Order of Ecclesia is the cues that it takes from Simon's Quest of all things. And something that I said about the DS trilogy in the past is that after Dawn of Sorrow, it's like they didn't quite know what to do. You know, Aria of Sorrow, I think had a very strong vision behind it. I think Iga really, really liked these characters he was creating. He really liked this world that he was developing. They really liked the Soul system. I don't like it, but I think the devs really liked it. But then after Dawn of Sorrow, you know what I'd really love to see? I'd love to see like a big chart of how all the games in the series sold, because I want to know how well they did. I want to know, like, were they making decisions based off of, oh, this underperformed, or like, oh, this did really well? Because what's fucked up, this is like the most fucked up thing I've ever heard, is that Circle of the Moon sold way better than Harmony or Aria. Aria sold better than Harmony, but Circle of the Moon sold like more than double the units that Aria did. And I think it was a situation where people bought Circle of the Moon, and then they were like, wow, that was really bad. I'm never buying another one of these GBA Castlevania games. And so Circle of the Moon kind of fucked the other two. Because Aria of Sorrow is considered like a fucking masterpiece nowadays, but it got outsold by fucking Circle of the Moon of all things. Anyway, my point is that Dawn of Sorrow had this very strong, passionate, like, artistic vision behind it, or at least that's the impression that I get. And then after Dawn of Sorrow either underperformed, or after they decided they didn't want to do that anymore, it's like they're like, well, what else do we do? And Portrait of Ruin felt like them going back to Bloodlines and trying to sort of like iterate on that entry. Because like I said in my Portrait of Ruin video, the idea of actually of a Castlevania game that took place during World War II, or I suppose, when does Portrait of Ruin take place? Is that during or right afterwards? I think it's in the middle of it. I can't remember. Anyway, that was an idea they had all the way back in like 1994. So I guess that was them thinking, well, this is our opportunity to finally make this game that we were contemplating all the way back then. And then with Order of Ecclesia, it's like they decided, like, let's go back to Simon's Quest. Let's go back to Simon's Quest, and let's do it, like, correctly this time. And Order of Ecclesia is not exactly like Simon's Quest. There's obviously a lot of differences. Because Simon's Quest was one big interconnected environment which you had to explore in order to get different tools. Order of Ecclesia is not really like that. Like, the outdoor areas in the overworld do essentially boil down to being relatively linear levels, which I don't have a problem with. But in terms of the structure of the game, it's kind of like if after you got to the last mansion in Simon's Quest, like when you got to the place where you fight Dracula at the end, it's like if there was a whole mini Castlevania game that happened in there. So I think it's very interesting that if my hypothesis is true and they really didn't quite know what to do after Dawn of Sorrow, then it was an interesting decision for them to sort of go back and, like, let's do this idea that we had all the way back in 1987, 20 years ago, and do it, like, correctly. And it's not, it's like the similarities between this and Simon's Quest have to do with the structure of the game, the overall structure of the game, and then a couple of, like, really obvious references in the level design. And I just think it's a really interesting decision, and I think it's a good decision. These fucking guys. Usually, like, I don't know. I feel like I usually have an easier time killing these guys. And the reason I'm not using a Glyph Union is because there's going to be a boss fight right after this that I'm saving up my hearts for. Otherwise, I would just be stabbing these guys. Oh yeah, I want to talk about the weapon that I have now. So, those spear guys drop the lance weapon. And there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types, 5 types of weapons? Rapiers, swords, sickles, hammers, lances, bows. 6 types. And every one of those types has 3 different, like, versions of them that you get at set points throughout the game. Instead of making you farm for shit like Dawn of Sorrow, they just give you the weapons. Well, okay, that's not entirely true, because some of the weapons, even like the strongest versions of the weapons, are from random drops, and that would be really problematic if the best weapon in the game wasn't the lance, which the first the weakest iteration of it you do have to get from a random drop off of those spear knights, but the drop rate is pretty high, and you fight like 12. Like, I've never had that not drop for me. But then the two stronger lances are both guaranteed to get in specific spots in the game, so that's fine. And the reason I say the lance is the best weapon in the game is because it feels, or to me anyway, is because it does feel more like a whip or a claymore in that it's got long range, and sort of you have to, the balancing factor is the slow wind-up time, which can be mitigated. Because I'm only going to be dual-wielding up to a certain point. Once I have, once I get a good magic spell, which I think is going to be after this boss fight is when you get the access to your first useful piece of magic. Then I think I'm going to swap to, like, probably lance in the main hand and then magic in the offhand for a lot of the game. But what's so cool about Order of Ecclesia is that, I don't know if you noticed this, but the thing that you pick up at the end of the prison island is this system that lets you swap between 3 preset glyph configurations. That's why there's a letter C underneath my mana bar right now. You have 3 configurations, A, B, and C, and you can just swap between them with like a button press. Which is such a good idea. I can't even put it into words. It's so smart for them to do that. To just cuts down on menuing. It means that if you encounter different problems in the game, which you will, and which will have different solutions, you don't have to like fucking go into the pause menu to fuck with them like you had to do in even in Ario and Dawn of Sorrow. You had to go into the pause menu to change. No. There was a thing in Dawn of Sorrow that let you swap between 2 different soul configurations. It's an Aria of Sorrow that there wasn't? Fuck, I don't remember. Because I don't want to give those games shit for something, and then for me to be wrong about it, so I don't remember. Speaking of giving things shit, this is a boss fight that I think is, like, it's a kind of idea that's like, this is really cool on paper, and it's pretty neat the first time you see it, but once you get to this boss and once you figure it out, this is like fucking boring shit. I mean, it's really cool. Like, I like the idea of fighting a giant crab monster in a lighthouse, but there's actually a fun little quirk about these last 2 phases here, because there's a crack already in the ceiling, and the idea is you want to get him to aim at that crack and break it. But I couldn't believe when the first times that I was fighting this boss that you could just crouch there and not get hit by his claw. I thought you had to like dip down to a lower platform to avoid getting hit by it. But then once I figured that out, which was like a really specific timing, because sometimes one of his legs will like intercept with the platform underneath that platform that you crouch on. So I thought, wow, this is like a really stringent like timing check for a boss that's this early in the game. But because you can like drop down and then jump back up again without getting hit by his leg, but the timing is like really specific. And then it turns out you don't have to do that at all. You can just fucking crouch there, and the fight is just over. So it goes from being like too hard to being weirdly easy and kind of boring. But again, like, it's only boring because I play these games over and over again, and it was pretty cool the first time I got there. Actually, that boss kind of filtered me the first time I played this game. That was really tough to figure out. Like I said at the start, the bosses in Order of Ecclesia are tough, and you have to take them seriously, because they will do a bunch of damage to you. Which you haven't seen yet, because I haven't taken damage on a boss fight yet, but that's going to change, I promise you. So now I think I should finally talk about the villagers and like who these guys are and why they exist. Another thing that I should actually also point out, because it relates to an earlier point I made about hearts, is that there is a well in the village that you can use to replenish your hearts whenever you want. So like if you want to have full hearts going into a new level, you can go back to the village and replenish it. You don't necessarily need to do like the min-maxing, like only replenishing hearts from heart expansions. I think there is a point where I do go to the village to replenish my hearts, but in my mind, optimally, I don't ever go back to the village to do that. Where it's like, optimally, I just play through the levels, linearly in order, and I only use the heart expansions to restore my hearts. And so this is an interesting thing. Another thing that Order of Ecclesia does that I think is a really good idea is it does not incentivize map completion at all. And I think this is probably going to be divisive. I think some people would say incentivizing map completion is good because that makes the player, forces the player to engage with all the environments and like see everything. There are some things in these games that are just fucking obnoxious and that are just not fun to interact with, and implementing, like, forcing you to do map completion to get certain things incentivizes engagement with obnoxious mechanics or obnoxious level design most often. So the fact that Order of Ecclesia does not do that is a big point in its favor. But so the reason that I went up to the top left area there is because there are ways to get from the lower area of the Calidus channel to the upper area. But in order to do it, you have to like push this exploding barrel around underwater, and it's really, really obnoxious to do. And the key word there, and there's two places where you have to do that. I'm going to do the one on the right, because doing the exploding barrel thing on the right side also gives you access to a hard expansion and I think a magic expansion, or like a magic expansion and an energy tank. I don't remember. But the point is that I want to do the one on the right. I don't want to do the one on the left. So I just go up the left side of the map initially to just get the chest that's up there from the top instead of trying to get it from the bottom. In terms of getting the one on the right, I'm fine with just doing the exploding barrel puzzle. But another thing that I really want to point out, because I said at the start of this video that this game really grew on me, and I think this is the best of the DS trilogy. This is one of the best Castlevania games I've ever played. But as I also said earlier, the early game is a problem. And the early game is not as good as the late game, and water levels, man. Water levels just don't belong in video games. That's just my opinion. Order of Ecclesia has not only one water level, but two. To be fair, they never make you fight a boss underwater, which is what Portrait and Dawn of Sorrow both do, and it's like a real bonehead decision to do that. So there are water levels in Order of Ecclesia, but they never make you fight a boss underwater, which is nice. It's nice that it's like you're almost there, but I think water levels in video games are almost never fun, or basically are never fun, because there's nothing fun about going slowly and having your movement restricted. To be fair, in Order of Ecclesia, if you're underwater, your movement is actually, you can jump infinitely, right? So it's not like your movement is only restricted. You do have this extra capability, but like your lateral movement is restricted and you go really slowly. This is the exploding barrel room I was talking about. This is really annoying. And they put these fucking respawning enemies in it, so you can't just like focus on trying to like wrangle it over to where you want it to be. You have to constantly interrupt yourself to go fucking deal with them. This is really annoying. Like this room right here, honestly, is probably the worst part of the entire game. But once it's over, once you're past the 2 water levels in Order of Ecclesia, the rest of the game is basically fine. And the thing is that I almost wonder if it's, because other thing about Order of Ecclesia is that there's a pretty lengthy span of time before you get the double jump. And the thing about this underwater level is that it's like, here you don't have the double jump, but you still have like access to unrestricted vertical movement without it. So it's almost like they put this in here to sort of like give you a level where you could do that before they gave you the double jump. I don't know. It's a weird thing. I feel like there's some kind of connection between the fact that it takes a while for you to get the double jump and the fact that this water level is where it is in the game. I don't know. It's just my opinion. So yeah, Order of Ecclesia, early game, not as good as the late game. That's also another reason for that is not just because the early game has some really inadvisable level design, like with these water levels, but also because the glyph system, which I still feel like I've barely talked about it. The glyph system is a system that rewards experimentation, because you get different glyph unions by combining different glyphs. So far, all you've seen are like double weapon glyphs, double weapon glyph unions rather, where like I use a glyph union because I had 2 rapiers or because I had 2 spears, but there are other ones that are Like, if you combine, like, a weapon and a certain type of magic, I think you might have seen me use one earlier, the, like, light, like, sword attack. I don't know, I've only used it once so far, I think, but it's... My point is that enemies have elemental weaknesses, and engaging with the glyph system to take advantage of those weaknesses is really cool and really rewarding. The problem is that you don't really get access to that much magic or that much like varied elemental damage until you get to the late game, and that's when the glyph system becomes more interesting and becomes a lot more rewarding. That having been said, as much as I'm talking up the glyph system as something that, like I said, rewards experimentation and that is varied, I am going to be using pretty much the same... I'm not going to be using that many different glyphs. I'm going to be using whatever the best lance glyph at the time is, whatever the best hammer glyph is at the time, sometimes, in a couple of situations, and then I'm going to be using light magic, and then like a little bit of dark magic, and then a little bit of ice magic. And there are some glyph types that I'm just like not going to touch at all. Just because I never really found uses for them. And that's fine. I don't need everything to be... I don't need every glyph to be useful. That's not a huge... That's not... I don't really consider that to be like a problem, the fact that there are some glyphs that are just not that good. Like the glyph that I went out of my way to get, I actually like forgot to even talk about this as was happening, but I went through a little room earlier that had a bunch of electric stuff on the floor and electric stuff on the wall, and that's where you get your first lightning glyph, and you might think, well, that sounds good, right? A lightning glyph? Like, isn't that like early game magic? Isn't that pretty good? Well, no, it's not that good, because it doesn't really do any damage, and not that many enemies. At this point, I'm going to get much more use out of the light glyph, Luminatio, that I got from the Lighthouse than I am from Volfulgur, which is the first available lightning glyph. Because the Volfulgur hits will, like, lock onto enemies and, like, will always hit them, but it won't, but it doesn't do any damage, basically. And so it's therefore not useful, and none of the bosses that are coming up, which are, like, the obvious place to use glyph unions, are weak to lightning. There are going to be... I'm going to use some glyph unions on some regular enemies in the second water level when we get there, but those guys are weak to dark and light, and those glyph unions are just going to be easier to utilize naturally. Something that I actually haven't mentioned at all that I think I started to, or like I tried to, but I got sidetracked, is the villagers that I'm rescuing. And this is going to take... So, okay. Should I even talk about this now, or should I wait? I guess I can bring it up. I guess I'll talk about it now. Because the thing is that you guys aren't going to see it for a little while, but there's a quest system in Order of Ecclesia. If you guys watched my Portrait of Ruin video, there's a quest system in Portrait of Ruin where you talk to a certain NPC, and he sends you, out to do certain things, then you go back and talk to him and you get rewards from him. And Order of Ecclesia has a similar system with those villagers, where the villagers will tell you to go out and get certain items, bring them back to them, get a reward. I gave the quest system in Portrait of Ruin a lot of criticism, because some of the quests were like things you would naturally do, like he would tell you to go to a place like right before you go to a place and then you go there. A lot of other quests that were given to you in Portrait of Ruin were very annoying, because it was like you would get back from an area you were just in, and then he'd tell you to go back to it and do something. Or he'd tell you to do something like annoying, like drain all your MP, or like spin around in front of him, or like sell all your shit, or like get 0 gold, or like a bunch of like really annoying stuff that breaks the pacing of the game because you have to like stop and do it. And the reason I say you have to is because the Nest of Evil, which was an entire like area of Portrait of Ruin, was only accessible via the quest system. So if you didn't do it, you were locking yourself out of what I would call a significant a significant chunk of the game. Because I didn't like the Nest of Evil that much as a whole, but it was still, I would still consider it like a level in the game, and I would consider it like part of the game. So I felt compelled to do it. The quest system in Order of Ecclesia is not quite like that. You might notice that I've been opening up little, like, small brown treasure chests in the previous levels, and they give me things like chamomile or iron ore. Those are the items that some of the villagers will ask for their quests. So, oh my god, awooga! Humana, 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 eyes pop out of head, smash self in forehead with hammer, start tearing down walls, tearing up wallpaper, throwing chair into wall, smashing table apart, air horn, air horn, air horn, train coming through, laying on the car horn, alarms, 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 air raid sirens, holy fucking shit. Sorry, that is a lady with boobs. Anyway, what was I saying before my train of thought was derailed? Those are the items that they ask for the quests, and that's important because it means that you get the items that are needed for the quests just as you're naturally completing the levels. Like, you don't even have to stop to pick up the treasure chests. You can just hit up as you walk by them, and you'll open them up, and you'll get whatever's inside them. So, it's not intrusive. Now, there is an exception to that, which is going to come later in the game that I'm going to talk about, because like Portrait of Ruin, Order of Ecclesia has a secret area called the Large Cavern that's kind of like the Nest of Evil. And you can only get to that by doing quests. And I am going to do those quests. I am going to do the Large Cavern, but my feelings about the Large Cavern are very different from my feelings about the Nest of Evil, and my feelings about the quest system in Order of Ecclesia are very different from my feelings about the quest system in Portrait of Ruin, because of the reasons I already outlined. How the quests that are relevant, the quests that give you relevant rewards, like better armor or access to better like jewelry accessories. That's what the lady with the boobs does. She gives you like rings, gives you access to like rings that are pretty good. And not just rings, also headpieces that can reduce certain elemental damage. I'm not going to use those. I don't think I'm ever going to do any for quests in this run. I don't really remember. I don't think I ever do. But I bring that up just to say that the quests that give you tangible gameplay rewards, for the most part, are completable just by opening up the chests you see in the levels and getting whatever's inside them. And for the most part, if you happen not to find the items you want, it's really not that big of a deal. If you, like, don't do certain quests. There is one exception, which is that, and you're not going to see this in this video, but if you want to get high potions in the shop, which, if it's an early playthrough and you're not super familiar with the game, you do, because Order of Ecclesia can get really rough, and high potions, having like a nice stockpile of high potions is a nice thing to have. If you want to get high potions in the shop, you do have to farm something from an enemy in a late game zone. But look at that flashing, seizure flashing. But if you want to just grab your balls and say fuck it, and say I'm not going to use high potions, and just play the game like that, you can just ignore that quest. And that's what I did. I didn't do any of the quests that unlock stuff in the shop. I think I do the blacksmith quests that give you better armor. I would be surprised if I didn't. Although we'll see what happens. And then the lady you rescue from the underwater place from the Calidus Channel, the lesbian seamstress, she gives you robes that increase your int. And there are a couple of points in the game where having higher int is really important. But that being said, I don't do her quests either, because it's important, but it's not so important that... It's one of those things where, like, if I happen to get the 5 cotton thread that she needs for the first quest, or if, like, I happen to get, like, whatever is needed for a certain quest, then, then I'll go turn it in. But if not, then I don't really care and I don't bother doing it. And I want to point out something really important about the Skeleton Cave, which is the level we're in right now. So the Skeleton Cave is, I would say it's actually a noteworthy spike in difficulty. I also want to talk about, I finally found a bat glyph to use besides the magnet one that's actually generally useful. Once you get Fides Fio, or whatever it's called, there's no reason not to just have it on all the time, because you can swap to the magnet glyph when you need it, of course, but there's no reason not to have this on all the time. And there are other stat boosting glyphs that I'll swap to when I get to them, but this is the first one that's useful. There's one that boosts Khan that you can get from the Calidus channel somewhere, but I guess I don't really know exactly what Khan does in this game. What Khan usually does is it just reduces the duration of status effects, which is about as useful as balls on a truck. Because if you get a status effect, just drink a fucking anti-status effect potion. I don't know. I guess if you don't have those, then it's useful, but Higher Mind is generally more useful because Shanoa has much less mind than she has defense. You don't have access to, like, armor that's boosting your defense. Rather, you don't have access to armor that'll boost your mind, you have access to armor that's boosting your defense. And, like, when Shanoa takes mega damage in normal mode, it's because she got hit by some kind of magic attack. Like, these Bone Serpent guys, if you get hit by their fire attacks, it will do a ton of damage. And I mean like 97. I mean, like, damage that will, like, 3-shot you if you get hit by it. But the thing about the Skeleton Cave I want to mention is that the Skeleton Cave is really tempting you to use Vol Macer, which is what I have on right now, because mace weapons are good against skeleton enemies. And I'm using it against these turrets, but you'll notice that when I was fighting the headless guys, or the skeleton dancers, the guys that jump around, I was actually using the lance, and that's because the mace, or the skeleton heroes, the guys with the 2 rapiers, I was using the lance, and the reason is because the hammer, the game is kind of baiting you, because the hammer has a shorter range than the lance does, and if you, like, so when you, like, stance up to start doing the, like, dual wield back and forth thing, a lot of the times you don't kill the enemies in time before they manage to get an attack off on you. It depends on your level. It depends on whether or not you can kill them in, like, 2 swings or not, but if you can't, or sometimes even if you can, it's like they'll just get an attack in on you. Whereas if you fight them with the lance, it's like, yes, you're doing less damage per hit, but you'll kill them like pretty fast anyway, and you're in a constant position of absolute safety. So that's why I use the mace against the skeleton heroes and the Dullahan. That's why. This boss is a fucking piece of shit. I fight this guy with 2 different sets of glyphs. I dump all my hearts into the double mace glyph union because it's big, so it'll hit all 3 of his tentacles, and because the fact that it's so large means that I don't have to jump to use it. I've jumped a couple times anyway, but after I use the double mace glyph union, after I double my hearts, I swap to double Luminatio. I really wanted this to be a no damage, because once I noticed that I'd no damage the first 3 bosses of the game, I thought, like, holy shit, what if I, like, no damage every boss in the game? That'd be like, sick. It'd be so sick to upload a run where I do that, but he just fucking hits me. This boss is, like, impossible to no damage. I mean, it's not impossible to no damage, but it's just so hard, because you have to pay attention to where he is, you have to pay attention to where all 3 of his tentacles are, and you have to try to pay attention to the, like, bones and the things that he shoots out that bounce around the room. And that's why I think double Luminatio is the best option for that boss, because the light damage will, like, hit him over and over again, and the damage will stack up pretty well on him, but more importantly, the fact that you have these light projectiles zooming around all over the place means that they will clear out the bouncing bones and stuff. But the thing is that, like, they might and they might not, just by the nature of their trajectory and by the nature of the bones' trajectory. Okay, the fucking wire on my microphone is in a weird place. Hang on a second. Fuck. Okay, okay. I just listened back to my one of my Richter mode commentaries that I just uploaded. And something that happens like 3 times in the first half an hour is you hear these ungodly like bumping noises and like creaking, metallic creaking noises, and then you hear me saying, "Oh man, sorry guys, I had to move my microphone. I gotta remember to edit that out," and I always forget. So I'm gonna try to remember to edit out whatever sounds you just heard from me adjusting the microphone wire. I'm sorry if I forget. I really just... usually when I put these commentaries together, I'm more concerned about like sound levels being even and like my voice being understandable and some of the game sound being audible and the game music being audible. And I'm going to talk about the music in order of Ecclesia. This is as good a time as any to talk about it because I actually kind of like the track that plays in Skeleton Cave. I've said before in this channel that I'm a gameplay guy first and foremost, but you know, my favorite game in the series is Rondo of Blood, and Rondo of Blood, a big part of what makes it so good is, I mean, the gameplay is rock solid, right? The gameplay is practically perfect, except like item crashes being too good. But what elevates Rondo, besides the presence of Maria, is the presentation. Rondo looks fucking great, and it sounds fucking great. And do I not go get the... There's an energy tank over to the left that I am not getting. I guess, did I just forget, or do I not care? I guess either or. That's really interesting. I guess it doesn't make a... I don't know, energy tanks are like 20 HP. That's kind of a big advantage to leave on the table. Oh well, whatever. I mean, I guess I just wanted to get out of here because I think I was really mad about not no-damaging the man-eater because the thing is that I don't usually no-damage the giant skeleton. So once I no-damaged the giant skeleton, I felt like I was on track to do something extraordinary, and I felt like I was pretty confident in my ability to no-damage almost all the other... Well, I can't really no-damage the Grim Reaper on Shinoa. Anyway, I think I was just mad and I just wanted to get out of there fast. But like, yeah, presentation. Yeah, see, these guys know who Dracula is. So Dracula's not a secret. Until the future, I suppose. An old mansion. See, I told you guys, it's Simon's Quest. You're wandering around looking for the pieces of something. In this case, it's the pieces of Dominus instead of the pieces of Dracula. And you're going to old mansions. I'm trying to say like 3 things at the same time. Let me go back. Rondo of Blood. Great presentation. Great music. Great visuals. The game looks fucking gorgeous. Order of Ecclesia has the best soundtrack in the entire series. This is actually a terrible time to bring this up because the music that's playing right now is, I think, probably the worst track in the game. That might just be an association thing because it is a water level. It's the second of the 2, like I think I already said, highly inadvisable water levels in the game. But it's kind of slow-paced and boring, and I want to talk about something that I think I said in Portrait of Ruin, is that the music in these later Castlevania games, I hate to say it, has been kind of lackluster. Like, ever since Symphony of the Night, and it has to do with the nature of the games as a whole, because the old classic Castlevania games were arcade-style, right? And they were fast-paced, they were action-oriented, and the music reflected that. With every game, with like the Igavanias post-Symphony of the Night, there's more of an emphasis on exploration. And the result of that is a lot of music became more atmospheric and sort of slow-paced and, less intense. And that makes sense based on the kind of games that they were, but I don't really like that kind of music as much. I like things to be more like fast-paced and like emotive, I guess, than that. I think ambient music is fine if I'm like trying to listen to it while I'm doing something else, but like I prefer something more actiony and more fast, I guess is what I would say. And a lot of the later Castlevania games haven't really delivered on that. Order of Ecclesia goes back to that style in a big way. And again, this is actually a terrible time to bring that up, because this zone and this track is a good example of the kind of music I was talking about before, where it is more atmospheric and it's not like really actiony. But I'll point out when like the really good music tracks crop up. And I'll point out like what I like about them and why they're not like what the usual like later Castlevania fare. And here I'm just dumping hearts because there's going to be a heart expansion before the boss fight in this zone that's coming out pretty soon, so I don't care. And this is kind of exactly what I'm talking about when I mean like full utilization of glyph unions, where I know that before the boss I'm going to have full hearts no matter what, so the smart thing to do is to use all of them up ahead of time. And this is also a good example of like when swapping between the two glyph setups is good, because the starfish that I was fighting earlier, they take way more damage from Umbro than they do from Illuminatio, but these ghost enemies are not weak to dark, but they are weak to light. So it's like you want to swap back and forth all the time because there's different kind of enemies with different weaknesses, and then the boss that's coming up doesn't have either of those weaknesses, so I just want to like fight her normally. And I really need to talk about this boss, because this boss kind of becomes a disaster, and I was really hoping to no damage it. There's like this like trio of mid-game bosses where it's the Man-Eater, it's this chick, and then the boss in the mansion that the elder in the village mentioned. And I didn't really think I'd be able to no damage the Man-Eater. I kind of hoped that I might once I stumbled upon the double Illuminatio thing, but I really wanted to no damage these two if I couldn't no damage Man-Eater. And I don't remember what exactly goes wrong here. I think it's something pretty stupid. I think I accidentally destroy, no? Okay. Oh, that was it. Yeah, I jumped when I didn't have to. Yeah, that was really upsetting, because I kind of felt like I almost had it, but, that was just a result of being overcautious, because all you have to do to avoid either for attacks are just backdash, and now I don't care. Now that I know I've flubbed the no damage, I'm gonna get more aggressive because I know I can take a couple of hits and be okay. So, I'm not upset about the second hit. I'm only upset about the first hit. And that boss, it's like this is where like the dual wielding thing becomes a problem, because I'm still doing it. I'm not quite out of the dual wield zone yet in terms of like the gameplay. That's not really gonna happen until when? When do I stop dual wielding? It's not until like a little bit later. Not until like we get to the halfway point when the game kind of changes. That's roughly when it happens. And it's a problem that's like, it's literally just like I just don't have enough fingers, or more accurately, I'm just not used to the mechanical, I'm not used to the physical act of doing the dual wield thing, because you have to like tap the buttons over and over again. And what I'm used to doing when I'm fighting an enemy and I'm ready to backdash is I'm hitting the attack button over and over again, and then I have like my other finger on the backdash key. But here, with that boss, I'm like incorporating a third finger that I'm not used to, and the result is that it takes me a little bit longer to process that I'm like supposed to backdash. So, like when I fight that boss on Albus mode, you're going to see this. Eventually I'm going to upload some Albus mode footage, which is the alternate mode in the game, where you play as Albus instead of Shinoa. And there I like shit all over that boss, because when you play as Albus, you have his gun, and his gun just like auto-shoots. You can just hold down the button and it shoots. And I destroy that boss because all I have to do is just hold down the attack button, and then I can just free up all the rest of my like brain activity for watching out for her movements and just preparing to backdash. This part fucking sucks too, by the way. Just like hoping these fucking things don't hit you to get this glyph, and this glyph is really important. That axe glyph is actually super important for the boss in the mansion, which I'm going to talk about when we get there. But I just want to finish giving my excuses as to why I got hit on the Rascala. It's because I was doing something that I wasn't used to. Something like physically that I wasn't used to. So, oh well. But the ironic thing is that that's not even why I took damage. I took damage because I jumped when I didn't have to. If I had just backdashed and left it at that, I don't think that attack would have hit me. But I thought I wasn't far away enough. I thought I needed to get a little bit of extra distance, so I jumped, and that's what fucked me up. But the point is that the only reason that fight is as stressful as it is, the only reason I like feel that uncertainty and that it's not just like surgical and consistent is because I'm doing the like dual wield thing. And here, I think I'm hoping to get enough hearts to not have to go back to the village before going to the mansion. The reason I'm back at the prison island is because there's a villager here, and you have to rescue all 13 of the villagers to get access to the second half of the game, kind of like in Symphony of the Night, how if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you don't get access to the reverse castle. Here in Order of Ecclesia, if you don't rescue all the prisoners, you don't get access to the second part of the game, and that's more important in Order of Ecclesia because, like I said, the second half of Order of Ecclesia is, in my opinion, better than the first half by a pretty substantial margin. So, you really want to make sure you do this. I was really worried that, like, you'd have to do all, like, the villagers' quests to get something, but the villagers' quests are, I would say, very firmly in the arena of side content. Even, like, I'll mention this now, I'll tease this for later, but, like, the large cavern, I do not really think about the large cavern the way I think about the Nest of Evil as, like, something mandatory. Like, you can just skip the large cavern, because the large cavern is, like, it's so stupid that it, like, I don't know. I'm not going to say anything more about it. I guess I'll just leave it at that. Because you guys are going to see what the large cavern is like when I get there and why it's, like, so ridiculous. But basically, ironically, the fact that the quest system doesn't really give you that many rewards for engaging with it, like, counterintuitively is what makes it better, because it doesn't mean, like, the fact that most of the rewards are irrelevant is, like, good, because it means the game isn't, I don't feel like the game is forcing me to do it, to gain a material advantage in the gameplay. It's just something I can do for fun if I want to. Yeah, I'm definitely looking for hearts. That's the only reason I killed that Lance Knight and didn't just go straight to the teleport room, because I'm hoping he drops a glyph so I can get some more hearts. Because I do want a lot of... I'm gonna want to have some glyph unions to dump into the boss of the Giant's Dwelling, but for most of the fight, I'm anticipating using a combination of glyph unions, a combination of glyphs that do not produce a good glyph union, because glyph unions aren't. It's not like every combination has its own unique union. It's like different, like, types generally do. Like light, if you pair light with any weapon, you'll get the light attack that I was using before. And it's like that with all magic, as far as I'm aware. But if you pair two glyphs that, like, don't go together, like if I put on the mace glyph and the axe glyph, or the sword glyph and the axe glyph, which is what's going to happen later, you get this glyph union that's like a little, like, puff of smoke in front of you that does, like, strike damage. It does, like, mace, like, hammer damage, but it doesn't really do that much of it, and it's not super... It's not really good, and you kind of don't want to spend hearts on that if you can avoid it. But the conundrum is that sword plus axe is pretty much exactly what I want for the boss of this area, so I'm gonna go in with one glyph set up and then swap to another one. And this is why, like, the different preset glyph setups are, like, so important and such a good idea. Because it means that instead of just having access to, like, 2 different glyphs, you now have access to basically, like, 6. And, like, 3 different entire ways of interacting with the combat. It's so smart. I like that old lady's dialogue. I guess I should also... I don't know, because I'm worried about coming across... In Aria of Sorrow, I complained about the fact that the gameplay was constantly interrupted by, like, people talking. And here in Order of Ecclesia, there's, like, 13 people you have to rescue, right? Which is, like, 13... I think it's because... I think the reason it doesn't bother me as much is because they made an effort to make the villagers a little bit more, like, interesting to talk to. Most of the characters in Aria of Sorrow... I don't know. This is a tough feeling to backtrace, but for some reason it doesn't bother me as much. I mean, both games you could make the argument of, like, just skip it if you don't want to read it, right? And, like, I basically agree with that. So I'm not gonna belabor this point too much. But it does just feel different somehow, and I can't quite put my finger on why. So this is actually a really important time. Okay, so I just got cursed. And something that I have actually somehow not managed to mention yet is the fact that, you know, that's so cool. That was so lucky. Yeah, now I just gotta wait, because I don't have any uncursed potions. Because Glyph Unions cost hearts, everything else costs MP, and I didn't even... I spent so much time trying to talk about the glyph system, I didn't even talk about that. And that's the kind of thing that... Well, first of all, it means curse is way more debilitating, because it means that you can't do anything while you're cursed, pretty much. If you don't have any MP, you can't even attack. The only damage you can deal is by slide kicking, which is what I did to kill that lady coming out of the portal with the scissors there earlier. But the fact that using glyphs to attack costs MP was the kind of thing that when I first learned about it made me really concerned, because I was like, oh god, is there going to be like a bunch of downtime? Am I going to be put in this shitty situation of like, I'm waiting for my fucking MP to regenerate before I can attack anymore? But I think the combat was carefully designed to have a lot of natural downtime. When I say natural downtime, I mean downtime that doesn't feel frustrating, doesn't feel like you're waiting. I just mean that there's like natural pauses between the combat. And even a lot of the boss fights, well, I would say not a lot, almost all of the boss fights are designed in such a way so that you are going to have downtime where you're going to be able to like have time to regenerate your MP. And another brilliant thing about the implementation of glyph unions is that, you know, your MP will only not regenerate if you're not for like a short period of time after you're not using it. So while you attack with glyph unions, your MP will regenerate. So it's like giving you... That's just another natural way to fit MP regeneration into the combat is by using glyph unions. Because while you're using glyph unions, you're not using your MP, and your MP will start to regenerate. So beautiful. It's all... Everything is so wonderfully designed. And here I go back to get nice, even 100 hearts, because which I think doesn't matter. Because I'm going to start off using the double sword item crash on this item crash, glyph union on this guy, and I don't remember if that's 25 or 50. I think it's 15. And if it's 15, then that means that I didn't really need to spend any time doing that. Or no, I'm not going to... Oh. Oh, right. I forgot that I did this. I think I'm deciding whether or not to go in with double axe or to go in with sword axe. And I think I'm deciding I start off with double axe, then I switch to sword axe. I'll see what happens. See, this is the problem with doing these commentaries so long after I collect the footage, is that I don't always remember exactly. But that's kind of what makes it exciting to watch this stuff, because it means I don't always remember exactly what happens. Yeah. So my strategy here is I'm going to start off with just a bunch of glyph unions. Then once I'm out of hearts, or actually what I should be doing, this is what I should be doing. I should be using my MP, and that attack where the shit falls down from the ceiling is why I'm using double axes. Because the axe is so good at intercepting all of those falling, like pieces of the ceiling. It's the best tool that you can possibly get, really, to deal with that. And also he's weak to slash damage, so it's also just a natural attacking option. And the reason that I wasn't sure about doing double axes is because, as you can see, it's got a pretty steep MP cost, which means that to contradict what I was just saying, you are not really going to be able to just spam axes to hit him. There is going to be periods of time where you're going to have to wait for your MP to regenerate. But that's just kind of the cost of using such a good tool against him, because axes have a long range, and they block what's the attack of his that's most likely to hit you. And like I said before, I wanted to get no damages. Because if you no damage bosses, you get like a medal, and I don't think you get anything for getting every medal. I don't really know, but just the fact that you get that means that like now it was like more important to me to do it than usual. It's a totally artificial like stupid thing. It doesn't make a difference, but I was like, okay, if I didn't no damage the Rascala, I need to no damage this guy. Like if I didn't get the no damage on Maneater, and then if I didn't get the no damage on Rascala, I need to no damage the Goliath. So that's why I'm playing kind of super cautiously, and I'm trying to save MP specifically to make sure that I have MP available so I can throw axes when he's doing the ceiling attack. By the way, this boss music is fucking sick. By the way, absolutely incredible. This boss music is so good. This boss fight is actually pretty cool. It's a good combination of manageable and punishing, where like I no damaged that encounter and I got that medal not just because I played correctly, but also because I made the right choice strategically to use double axes and to use them in the way that I did. So I feel like that was an earned no damage, in other words. This is actually a good point to talk a little bit about. I guess Albus is a funny character, and I can't really talk about why he's funny yet, because the reason I think he's so funny kind of involves the twists in the story later on. So for now, I'll just say that I think he's funny, and I also want to talk about. So really, I shouldn't even have brought that up. What the point was the point of mentioning that if I wasn't going to talk about it yet? I don't even know what planet I'm on. But the Dominus glyphs that you get from him are, I'm guessing they're probably pretty good. They do like a lot of damage. I think the first one you get like summons a green like rain that does a bunch of damage, but the problem is that they all cost health to use in addition to MP, and that's kind of using your health as a resource is something that can be really good under the right circumstances, but here I wasn't really enthused by the prospect, because like I briefly mentioned before, the one big stretch of farming in Order of Ecclesia involves getting items to be available in the item shop. And, oh my god. So when we were chasing after the pieces of Dominus, we really were kind of chasing after the pieces of Dracula. It can't be true. Yeah, the only big, like, rough stretches of farming involve, like, the item shop, so I just decided... The fact that I decided not to do that means that I don't have access to, like, a stockpile of 9 high potions at all times, which means that things are more dangerous than they otherwise would be. And that, therefore, means that the prospect of using my health doesn't really appeal to me. That's the kind of thing that I would do in a situation where I'm absolutely confident that I can control the amount of damage that I'm going to take. And you take so much damage from the most dangerous parts of this game that I don't know. It's possible there are some really useful early game applications for those Dominus glyphs that I just don't know about, but I never touch them. I just kind of focused on optimizing my hearts. I didn't really focus on optimizing like my health usage, which I think it's neat that Dominus lets you do that, but it was never something that I really wanted to do. I don't need to take this. Oh, I'm using it for the 10 hearts. Yeah. See, this is what's nice. I don't really want that glyph. I don't really need it, but because it gives me 10 hearts just for picking it up, I pick it up. The balloons come back from Symphony of the Night, which were the balloons coming back from Dracula's Curse. And they were in Harmony of Dissonance, too. I hate those enemies. They kind of shouldn't exist. They're not so bad here, but in hard mode, they show up in more places and they become a real problem. Here's the giant skeleton from the prison island. He's back and he's pissed. Here, you don't have the Magnus glyph to jump over him. And I think the idea is that you're just kind of supposed to kill him. Or what I tried to do there, which was like, there's no reason that shouldn't have worked, which is dive kicking off of his back to get behind him. Dive kicking off of enemies, it's like the game is very schizophrenic about it, where it's like sometimes it works and sometimes the game's just like, no. No, we decided that it doesn't work this time. And this is a great example of something that I briefly talked about before, which is enemies that walk at you. There's a couple of examples of this. There was a point actually that earlier when it happened, when it was like a bone serpent on the end of a big pillar being carried by a Frankenstein man. I swear to God this happened. I'm not making this up. Go back in the footage and you'll see it. It was in the Misty Mountain Road. That's an enemy that just walks towards you, and that's basically the game saying, "Hey, use your glyph unions. You have to kill this thing before it gets to you. Use your glyph unions, stupid." Which I don't really appreciate it. I like using glyph unions, but I don't like the game telling me exactly when to use them. That kind of rubs me the wrong way. Because that's what that is. Because if an enemy is just walking towards you and the only thing behind you is a wall, the game is saying you have to kill this enemy that's coming towards you in a certain span of time before they get to you, right? And if there's only so much damage you can do with your normal tools, then it's telling you to use glyph unions, which I don't appreciate. Yeah, this is the only character whose quests I'm going to do in this run, I think, because she gives you the access to the large cavern. I thought I did the blacksmith quests for iron ore, but maybe not. I think I decided that if I found, because the blacksmith gives you access to better armor, but only if you get 4 iron ore, and I think I just decided if I find 4 iron ore, I'll do it. If I don't, I won't. So it's like whatever. Yeah, that room back there, by the way, with the magnets and the bats coming at you, that's like straight out of Dracula's Curse right there. Like respawning bats over like fucking environmental hazards. Not as bad as Dracula's Curse, because in Dracula's Curse you'd be on like moving platforms and there'd be death pits under you. But that's like as close as like I feel like a later Castlevania game would get to like Dracula's Curse style gameplay. And something about Order of Ecclesia that I also want to bring up is that I talked about difficulty in Castlevania games and how I think it's not fair to the later games to say that they're like so easy when they do kind of go out of their way to try to give you ways to play the game that are exceptionally difficult if that's the kind of thing that you like. But Order of Ecclesia, I think, achieves a level of baseline, like if you just compare the Metroidvanias, like their normal difficulty, not augmented at all, Order of Ecclesia is like the hardest one, I think, on normal mode. Because the bosses really do not fuck around. Some of the enemies have really tricky patterns. There's rooms like that with the bats and the spikes. The clock tower is pretty rough. And the game is really kind of like forcing you to learn it and forcing you to engage with it in a way the other ones aren't, which I think is really good. Something that I said about Portrait of Ruin, one of my many, frankly, complaints about that game, was the fact that hard mode on a fresh file was too hard, and then normal mode was too easy. And Order of Ecclesia fixes that problem by making normal feel more threatening. Like I said, like the fact that like this is not a no healing items run. I don't think. Is it? Well, the point is that I didn't set out to do a no healing items run because I wasn't like that confident. I didn't think this is going to be so smooth that I'm going to be able to get through the whole thing without ever using a single healing item. I wasn't confident enough to say that. Which is also the case with Portrait of Ruin, to be fair, but that was kind of like just because of the Nest of Evil. Which is like the place where Portrait of Ruin like loses like 2 points in a game point ranking system. Is like the Nest of Evil is just like this cesspit. They made it optional. I don't know, maybe it's my fault for engaging with it, right? Anyway, I'm talking about Portrait of Ruin again. I already talked about Portrait of Ruin for fucking 1,500 hours. I gotta talk about Order of Ecclesia. Yeah, difficulty. I like Order of Ecclesia's baseline difficulty. It feels demanding enough to be satisfying in a way that the other games do not. A lot of these early rings, like the Chariot ring and the Magician ring that I got from the Calidus channel, are rings that give you like stat trade-offs. Like they'll buff certain stats of yours, but they'll lower other stats. I have interest in some of these. I picked up the Empress ring from the Timeout Forests because it increases int and strength at the cost of defense and mind. And even though I said that the game is tricky on normal mode, it's not so tricky that I'm going to turn down an increase in strength and int at the cost of some defense, because the bosses are really where the danger comes in Order of Ecclesia, and I'm fairly confident at this point in the run with my boss fights, because I actually recorded this, usually the way that... Come on, dude. Thank you. And oh, I should talk also about the fact that I was, like, jumping there. So this is where I stopped dual wielding, because now I have access to the second of the 3 lance glyphs, and now that I'm not doing any more water levels, something that I can consistently do is I can jump and attack and then jump and attack like rapid fire like that, because landing from a jump will like reset the attack animation and let you do it again. So instead of tapping back and forth with like the dual wield rapid fire shit, I think this will actually be... Please tell me I'm wearing the... Okay. I thought maybe I was still wearing the casual clothes, but I was not. That would have been so funny. I forgot that I bought the leather stuff from the shop, but that was fine. That was a good idea. Instead of doing like the back and forth dual wield like rapid fire attack stuff, now what I can do instead is I can just oh, this is interesting. This was an interesting little piece of routing. Yeah, like I said, I'm doing this lady's quests, and the Timeout Mountains that I was at before, there's a whole other area of it that's only accessible after you get the double jump, and you want to do that because there's a dude there, there's a villager there who you want to find. And there's actually like a whole other second half of the zone that I kind of thought about skipping. I could have skipped it if I wanted to. Maybe I probably should have if I wanted to be totally efficient with my time, but there's like an energy tank down there. There's some stuff down in the second part of the Timeout Mountains that I could get to take advantage of. So you guys are going to see all that. But yeah, I decided that because I'm going to get pretty soon... I'm coming up on the part of the game where you reach the point where you have to have rescued all 13 villagers, so... Shit. Sorry about that. I decided that it made the most sense to go back to the Timeout Mountains after I get the quest from the lady to go kill crows, because this is where all the crows are. And just like while I was thinking about it, get that villager, make sure I don't forget, make sure I don't get into a position where I get to that point in the game and it's like, oh shit, I forgot to rescue that other villager. So this is actually going to be a pretty lengthy detour, which I think is... I don't really need to be... I guess I'll talk about the green chests. The green chests are random, where sometimes a brown chest will turn into like a green chest and have a piece of treasure that's rarer or of like higher value. And the only reason I went and got that one is because sometimes they have pieces of gear in them that are really good. Like there's a ring called the Wind Ring, which I don't think I get in this ring. I don't think I get in this ring. I don't get the ring and the ring and the ring, which I don't think I get in this run, rather. But which increases slash damage, and the lances are slash damage, and like if I get that, that's a really great offensive upgrade. So usually if I see a green chest, I'll get it just in case there's a wind ring in it, but that didn't happen here, unfortunately. Yeah, the jumping, jumping with the lance glyph is a way of basically doing rapid fire attacking that's more flexible, because it means that I don't get locked into this like pattern of like dual wield slashing that like roots me to like one specific spot. It means that every single time I attack, if I jump every time I attack, that means every single time I attack, I can adjust my positioning, which is, like, so much better. It does look a little weird, and it's a little bit, like... I don't know. Oh, look at that! It's a Yeti! Yeah. Yeah, it's a rare spawn. I think it's a rare spawn anyway. The game treats it like a rare spawn, because one of the quests you can get is to go and, like, find the Yeti. Take a picture of the Yeti for a guy with a camera. That's the guy you find here, actually. I think is a guy with a camera. And I'm sorry if you guys are, like, I don't know. I'm sorry if you guys are, like, disappointed that you're not going to see, like, any of the quests, or you're not going to see that much of, like, the quest giver dialogue, because they do make an effort to make the villagers, like, characterized, which is like fine, but I just don't like busy work. And I don't like... I prefer efficiency. This is like the dumbest part of the whole game right here. So what's so dumb about this is just the fact that I'm even doing it. Because... Okay, so what you have to do here is you have to use the magnet point to throw yourself far enough to the right on the ledge that you're all the way on the very edge of it, so that way you can absorb the glyph before the wind pushes you off, but not throw yourself off the magnet point so far that you fly off of the right edge. And that's all to get... This is all to... So it's like, and it's like a very tricky thing to do. It's so specific. I never really... Like, I don't really even understand what the difference is between a fling off the magnet point that sends you over the right edge and one that just lets you stop close to it. But it's super hard. And the thing about this that's so dumb is that I never even use this glyph. Like, that's like a wind magic glyph there, and I literally never use it. But I don't know why I'm doing that. I think it's because, like, I felt like, well, now that once I started trying to do it, like, once I walked into the room, I was like, well, I might as well try it. And then once I started trying it, I was like, well, I might as well just get it. Like, I might as well fucking succeed instead of just, like, giving up, right? If I'm gonna take up this much time in the fucking video to try to get this glyph, I can't just leave without getting the glyph. So that's what this is. That's what this little acrobatics show you're watching is me, like, basically committing to, like, a bad decision. Please just get it. God damn it. How long does this take? I've been doing this for like a minute. You have to, like... How fucking, like... Oh, I had it. There it is. Alright, beautiful. Yay, we got the glyph that I will literally never use. Funny story about that room, actually. I didn't get at the time that... When I saw a glyph with a wing on it, I thought that was, like, the game's, like, flight form, right? Like, bat form in Symphony of the Night and Aria of Sorrow, or, like, owl form in Portrait of Ruin. And, I got a ring from the prison island called the Tower Ring, which said something like prevents you from being knocked away, but it, like, lowers all your stats. And I thought, oh, I bet you have to equip this Tower Ring and then come back to that spot to get, like, the flight form. But then I put on the Tower Ring and it didn't make a difference. What the Tower Ring actually does is it prevents damage knockback, which is good, but it's not good enough to be worth permanently reducing all your stats, because, like, you should just be trying not to get hit instead of dedicating equipment slots to a benefit that only is relevant if you get hit, in my opinion. I realize that describes all defensive armor in the game, but you're not giving up as much in that case. It's not like there's a... If you're using a ring slot to lower your stats, you're kind of gimping yourself, because the ring slots are really important for raising specific stats, whereas with the armor slots, they're pretty much just there to raise defense. A couple exceptions, and actually I'm going to do some, like, equipment swapping. Or do I do that in the hard mode run? Because I have two Shinoa runs. I have this normal mode run, then I have a New Game Plus hard max level 50 run, and then one of those two I'm, like, always swapping out equipment. I can't remember which one. I guess we'll find out. That's not going to be till the late game. So yeah, now I'm back to killing crows. I mostly did that lower area just to kind of, like, in case there were crows down there, which doesn't make sense because the crows are only out here. So that dude up there with the green stomach, that's what they call a cave troll. And cave trolls are the scariest motherfuckers in the entire game. Something that they decided, starting with Portrait of Ruin, is that, so cave trolls were just like a pretty like a normal enemy in Symphony of the Night when they first showed up. Ditto in Dawn of Sorrow. There's like actually like barely any of them in Dawn of Sorrow. There's only like 2 of them. And they kind of jump around and kind of, I had never seen that item before, by the way, the Archer Ring. It increases bow glyphs. And bow glyphs are kind of like, if the glyphs are on a continuum of like damage compared to safety, where like lower damage, more safety, the bows are on the most extreme end of the low damage, high safety thing, where like you can attack enemies from really far away, but the individual arrows don't do that much damage, which sounds nice, but the reason I didn't go for it is because the highest level bow glyph is not, it's available, but it's available in kind of an awkward place. You have to like backtrack to get it, and because the lance was working just fine. Like the lance was like has plenty of range, is all the range you could really ask for. Cave trolls in Dawn of Sorrow, like they had some interesting attack patterns where they'd like jump around and like try to stick their tongue out at you and do like this electric aura thing, but not super remarkable. What they decided, starting in Portrait of Ruin, is that, hey, what if we took this enemy that's like fairly unremarkable and we gave it this gimmick where it just does so much damage you can't fucking believe it. What if we just made this one random enemy like hyper lethal? So that's what they did in Portrait of Ruin. And in a game where most regular enemies will hit you for like, you know, in the late game, like 50 or like 25, cave trolls will hit you for like 200. And then in Order of Ecclesia, like I don't even want to fucking think about how much damage that thing would do to me at this point in the game if it hit me. Like I don't have end game armor. I don't have like, I don't even know how much damage that thing would do, but it would be a lot, I guarantee it. And then on hard mode, they are like fucking guaranteed to 2-shot you. Even if you're playing max level 50. Like those things are so dangerous. It's fucking insane. So I give that thing a wide fucking berth. And he's just like sitting there. He's the only enemy. No, there's another cave troll in hard mode that shows up in like a random ass place in the Taimyo Mountains. But in normal mode, that's the only like weird random cave troll. Otherwise, they only show up in the late game, in like the second half. So there's the Crow quest complete. And oh, I remembered why I'm doing this now. It's because the next zone is the Oblivion Ridge, which has werewolves in it. And then her quest after this quest is to go kill some werewolves. And so then after I do that, then I'm not going to talk to her for a little bit until like almost the end of the game, because the pacing, I'm going to go to the large cavern basically like right before I fight the final boss. For reasons that you will see. Reasons that I think are really funny. The large cavern is just a fucking goofy ass place. Here's the guy with the camera, yeah. Marcel. My good man. What year does this game take place in? 18 something? M'lady. That's not quite what happened. I also think that, like I agree with him, Shino is pretty hot, but I think that there are more interesting things happening in the countryside than just the fact that she's there. So I think he could probably be writing about, say, the werewolves or the lizard men with the giant swords. Also, want to point out... Well, no, I'll save that. I'll write that down to make sure I remember it, but I'm not going to say it yet, because it's more... I have a point that I want to make, but it doesn't really work in the current context. It has to do with stuff that happens later in the game. And I don't know why I'm being so coy about, like... I guess just in case somebody just, like, clicks on this video and you don't know anything about Order of Ecclesia, I don't want to, like, spoil the way that the story goes. Although the fact that I've said there's a twist means that you can probably already guess what it is, but just in case you can't, I'll let you enjoy it, because I didn't totally anticipate the twist when it showed up. I was like, oh, that's interesting. That makes sense. Which doesn't usually happen to me in video game storylines, and it's never something really that a Castlevania storyline has attempted before, is some kind of narrative, a severe narrative shift partway through it. And I hope I'm not overselling it, but you guys will see when it happens, and it actually should be coming up pretty shortly, so look forward to that. And to be honest, the only reason really that the twist did catch me off guard is because Castlevania games don't usually have twists in them. There's not usually any those two factors are related. And I think, as I said before, there is a good and a bad ending in this game, but I'm not going to show you guys the bad ending because, to be honest, it's kind of a downer. It's kind of a downer and it's not very interesting. You're only really missing, one exchange of dialogue, basically. And I don't usually, I don't know. I've included bad endings before if they're, interesting, like Aria of Sorrow has a cool bad ending. I guess I'd say Dawn of Sorrow does too, to a certain extent, but Order of Ecclesia is not very... And this is actually a really interesting little sequence here, where what I'm doing is there's a glyph up on a cliff over to the left that I really want, because it buffs your int. So it's the first, really super useful stat buff, but you can't get to it unless you do that, unless you bounce off of the eagles. And also the reason I was having trouble there is because, as is the case in previous Castlevania games, the eagle's spawn position is determined by which direction you're facing. You'll notice while I was facing to the left, they kept coming at me from the left, but then as soon as I faced to the right, one of them actually came from the right, which is what I wanted, and that's not a coincidence. They do that so that way you're not getting... There's not eagles coming up from, behind you. And plus int is really important for this fight because this guy is weak to ice and he's weak to blunt. But I now have an int buff, which makes using ice, I would say, more attractive than using, trying to, close distance with him and just hit him with a mace over and over again. It doesn't really work the same way. I mean, it's doable, but look at this. The fact that I can maintain that distance when he does, because when he peeks his head up and shoots out the little poison balls, you don't want to be close to him, because all it takes is one gap in your dual wield mace back and forth, and then you get hit by one. And I really want to no damage these bosses if I can, so this was just the more attractive option, I would say, all around. And you really can't let those little fuzzballs sit there. You gotta kill them, because eventually there'll come a point, I think fairly soon, where I'm gonna have to run across the whole arena. And those things persist. So if you don't blow them up, they're gonna sit on the ground and they'll impede your progress across the arena. And I think this is the part here. Yes. I don't know if you can... I don't know if it's picked up, but you can kind of hear what direction he's coming from when he does this. And that's another no damage. Sweet. And this is this is actually a special no damage to me, because when I first got to this boss, I had no idea how I would ever be able to no damage it, because it seemed so, it just seemed so chaotic and unpredictable, and the poison balls flying everywhere, because sometimes he just jumps at you, and really the trick is just very careful maintenance of your position. Because if you stand on top of one of those two pillars that he summons, then he'll dive at you out from under the earth, and it's really hard to dodge. And then you just have to kind of... And then in terms of avoiding... But the attack that's really hard to dodge is when he breaks the pillars and shoots all the debris at you, and there you have to just either be lucky and already be behind him when he comes out of the ground to do that, or just run all the way across the arena. Fortunately, in both of those cases there, I was behind him. Oh shit. he uses the word explain here. I think demonstrate would have been better. An explanation is usually something verbal. A demonstration is usually something physical. Aha! I don't quite understand how this works. Magic, I guess. What is this like? This is a lot like something. This is kind of like it's kind of like the ending of Dawn of Sorrow when Dimitri gets overtaken by like the demons he tries to absorb. Doesn't end quite as dramatically, I would say. And this is actually the first time when she says, Master Barlow, will he want to hear about this? You actually do have to go back and talk to Barlow before you can progress, which is something that I hadn't been doing in the past. Also, I don't remember if I already mentioned this, but I think I should explain the little hops that I'm doing. I may have already said this. It's actually been a little while since I recorded the last segment of commentary in this one, so I'll just go over it again quickly in case I've already said it. That's because it's just easier and faster to... Oh no, I did explain this already, because I was talking about how you could moderate your position, like, with each jump. You can, like, change it. You don't have to be committed to one spot like you do with, like, the dual wield back and forth. And it's just easier for me. I'm so used to attacking and jumping at the same time. Yeah, I already talked about this. I'm remembering now. Yeah, the grave Dorcas fight is pretty rough. And actually, this whole area is pretty rough. I never quite got down what to do about the eagles when they come towards you. Like, I feel like there's a particular timing I never quite grasped. And this whole area on hard mode is like entirely different because it's very like right there. Like that eagle, I guess I have to be more preemptive with it. And hey, eagles carrying hunchbacks. That's a fucking callback right there. Yeah, you just gotta kind of stand your ground and hit them. You can't try to... I think this is a problem I run into a lot in these Castlevania games where, like, when I encounter dangerous enemies, my instinct immediately is to try to gain distance on them. But in the later games, a lot of enemies will punish you for that. So that's something that I constantly had to kind of unlearn as I was going through these later games, is not every enemy can be avoided by just running away from them. And those eagles are like a perfect example, because that's why I kept getting hit, because I was trying to back up, and their pattern is designed to punish that. You just have to hit them, or I guess jump over them probably. I also, this part's a little weird. I don't quite understand how just watching her do it could give you the ability to absorb the glyphs. That seems like the kind of thing that you can either do or you can't do, you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how any of this shit works, you know? Because that's not what it's about. It's one of those things, you know? It's not really about the details. Every Castlevania game, really, at its heart, is like, we have some neat gameplay ideas, so let's take these ideas and put them in a story about a guy or gal who has to go to a spooky castle and fight Dracula. And that's to fight demons and monsters and stuff like that. That's really all it is. Where am I? Oh, I'm going to the save station, right? Save station. Oh man, I'm never gonna stop saying that shit, man. And I didn't turn in the werewolf quest because the reward she gives you for it isn't relevant, and I'm only doing the 2 other quests she gives before the 3rd one to get to the 3rd one. So I'm not gonna go back to talk to the older lady until until close to the end of the game. Also, that enemy there, the Jersey Devil. I'm not sure how many people know about this. The Jersey Devil is a local cryptid, local to New Jersey. The way it's depicted here is roughly equivalent to how it's supposed to look in sightings. I don't know how much you guys know about New Jersey. I guess if you're not... I know some people watch my videos who aren't from America. And I guess even if you are from America, maybe if you're like... I don't know how much people know about New Jersey. It's basically a state that exists because everybody wants to be in New York, but there's only so much space in New York and like near New York City. So New Jersey is a state that's like... It's like 1/3... like kind of like urban spillover from New York, 1/3 dumps, and then 1/3 haunted forest. And it's in the haunted forest that the Jersey Devil is supposed to live. And it's also the state with the most batshit drivers in the entirety of the continental United States. In fact, New Jersey drivers are so insane that they had to create a traffic pattern specifically to compensate for them. If you've never seen it before, it's called a jug handle. It's basically like instead of turning left at an intersection, you turn right to get into the adjacent lane going perpendicular to your lane, so that way you can just go straight across the intersection, because New Jersey drivers are so insane that the government doesn't even want them to try to turn left. So I finally get to use this lightning glyph that I absorbed. I think that's the only place I actually use it. Because lightning in this game, as in Portrait of Ruin, is effective against armored enemies. I guess because metal conducts electricity, it makes sense. And I kind of have trouble like fighting... These guys are kind of tricky to fight. Like they're not dangerous exactly. Like I'm not taking any damage, but sometimes after when I'm fighting those guys, you'll notice I like hesitate, and that's because when you kill their owl, they'll do that thing where they go down on... They'll do a thing where they go down on one knee, and then, yeah, this was ill-advised. I wasn't sure if lightning would do any damage to the plant or not, so I just tried it. They'll go down on one knee after their owl dies, and then they'll get back up, and they'll, like, attack you. But when they die, for real, they also kind of go down on one knee. So there's this no man's land where I'm not sure if they're dead yet, basically. So that's why I sometimes hesitate there. Obviously, if he dies before the owl, then it's okay, but like a situation like that right there, the only reason I knew he was dead is because I fought them so many times that I can tell, like, if I hit him that many times, he's probably dead. But, if I didn't have that, like, span of experience, I would think that, I wouldn't have been sure. God, the soundtrack is so good in this game. I don't know what changed, because it's the same lady who's like the lead composer in this game and Portrait of Ruin. She was first hired for Bloodlines, which I know everybody loves Bloodlines. Everybody loves the soundtrack from Bloodlines. I acknowledge that the soundtrack is really good, but it's just kind of like not my style of music, not the kind of soundtrack I like. The reason I'm fucking with this guy, by the way, is because I'm waiting for him to cast his goddamn spell so I can steal it from him. There we go. Now I can kill him, because I want that for something later in the game. Yeah, it's the same lady who's been like the lead composer for the series for a lot of the games, but she collaborated with different people between this game and Portrait of Ruin, so I don't know what changed exactly, but whoever the dude is that she collaborated with in this game was it must have been some kind of like beautiful synergy. But it really just kind of feels like an overall change in composition philosophy, because as I think I already said, the energy in the songs in Order of Ecclesia does seem generally higher. There's no, like, the only reason I rescue those cats is because I like, if I hear a cat meowing, then I just instinctively wanna fix whatever the problem is. That's what you get if you grow up with cats. You gain an instinct to if a cat is meowing, figure out what the problem is and fix it. And now we're coming up on what is, I have to say, like the best boss fight in the entire series. The last thing I said that about was the Julius fight in Aria of Sorrow, and this is very similar. It's what I would call a doppelganger style fight, where you're fighting something that's basically the same size as you, an enemy who's supposed to act the way that you act. It's not a literal doppelganger fight because you're not literally fighting a copy of yourself, but it's the same kind of encounter. And these are the fights that are the most interesting and the most like dynamic and the most exciting because you have to react so quickly and because it feels a lot like an actual fight. It doesn't feel like I mean, I like both kinds of boss fights. I was gonna say it doesn't feel like a dance. Some fights do kind of feel like dances. I don't mind a boss fight to feel like a fight as long as it's as learnable as the other boss fights are, and this one is. Although it took me a while to learn, and I don't no damage this, but it's very close. I really wanted to no damage, but that's okay. Yeah, this is the best boss fight in the series, and it has perhaps the single best music track in the series accompanying it, which is going to kick in pretty soon here. And it's the same like combo as the Julius fight. It's like the Julius fight, but honestly better, because the correct movements you have to make are just so much more complicated than the Julius fight. Because in the Julius fight, if you play it with the Death Scythe, it's really just about like backdashing a lot and using Black Panther if you ever find yourself in a tricky situation. Albus is so much more complicated. I mean, this is going to look pretty simple, but it really is like... Because normally, if you jump on top of him like that, like if you stay right up in his face like this, he will do like a fire kick attack that does a bunch of damage. But if he's already, when he starts running away from you like that, he's like already basically committed to running away and then shooting. So you have to wait until he starts running, then chase after him to close the distance. So it's like this very careful balancing act you have to do. And then when he starts doing the torpor crystals, that's when it gets really complicated. Because if he's too... You basically don't want to jump at him until he's already committed to shooting. But if he runs away with the torpor crystals, and he like is up against a wall, sometimes he won't do like the run up before he shoots you. He'll like just shoot you, which is not what you want, because you want the run up so you have time to react and jump over him. So that's why after the torpor crystal attack, I'll sometimes just sit there and wait, because I don't really want to close distance with him at that point, because I want to make sure that he has to close distance to get to me, so I have time to anticipate the actual next shot and then jump at him. And that's part of why I'm okay with this footage, even though it wasn't a no damage, because I did kill him by kicking him in the face, which is, like, that's a 1 in a million thing. I would never be able to do that, like, to plan that on purpose. So yeah, this boss fight is fucking insane. This is this is the fucking craziest, coolest shit since the Julius fight in Aria of Sorrow. I really like, and I feel like I feel like I can make a video like about this fight the way that I made a video about the Maxime fight, but I would say that the difference is that the Maxime fight, there's a lot of explanation for the Maxime fight in terms of like what to do with his different attacks, because the solution to his attacks is like very different, and the Maxime fight is also about going in with the right tools to beat him. All you really need for Albus is just a weapon, and having the Umbra weapon item crash Glyph Union that's what you want, because Albus is weak to dark. So if you go in with just Umbra and any weapon, that's the only tool you really need to beat him. Whereas with Maxime, you would want to go in with like Wind Dagger, basically. So I don't think there's really enough. I don't think it's quite complicated enough for me to make a whole video about it. But what's different about the Albus fight versus the Maxime fight is that the Albus fight feels more learnable and feels more like with the Maxime fight, it's kind of like so many of his attacks are so like fast and like kind of brutal and hard to dodge that it does just kind of feel more like you're just kind of wailing on each other. Well, that's not true. It basically feels less it's more reliant on what you go in with, basically. Which is not the case here. And the music is just like fucking incredible. It's there's lots of downtime in the Maxime fight. There's times where like you have to, because you have to keep so much distance from him the whole time to avoid getting hit. There's you spend a lot of time just kind of like waiting to see what he's gonna do. Whereas with Albus, there are periods of downtime once he starts doing the torpor crystals, but like other than that, you kind of constantly have to be doing things. You can't like sit there and wait. You have to always be thinking about your positioning and what you're gonna do next. This part's also pretty weird. Incidentally, this is the part where the endings diverge. If you don't rescue all the villagers, then you don't get the yeah. This part is weird. This actually took me a little bit to understand. I guess I'll let him explain it and then I'll explain it. So somehow when Albus imprisoned the villagers, he put Belmont blood into the glyphs he used to imprison them. So when Shanoa absorbed the glyphs that imprisoned the villagers, she got Belmont blood in her body, which is why she can hear Albus, who also drank some Belmont blood or something. I don't know. I don't really get this part. Again, it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of like... This just exists to create a point of divergence between the two endings, and to give you the last hour and a half of the game, pretty much. No, Albus, don't go. I've heard some people complain that like the fact that Shanoa is very like, because I don't know if you guys like really caught this, but the idea is that when Shanoa tried to use Dominus at the start of the game, it cost her like her emotions and her memories. I feel like they've said that, but I guess just in case you're like listening to this commentary, you're not really watching, which I know some people do, which is okay. That's kind of what's going on, and I've heard some people complain about that because it makes her like less interesting as a protagonist, but I kind of disagree. I think I prefer protagonists who are more low-key and who kind of don't necessarily like dominate a lot of the events in the game, like talking about how they feel about it. Although that's kind of what that part ends up being. I really like actually Shanoa sort of, she can't feel her emotions, but she's aware that she's supposed to. That's a really interesting thing. So I actually do like that element of her character. I don't mind. I would contrast it with like Charlotte and Jonathan, where like Charlotte and Jonathan are kind of just like, they're kind of like two teenagers like having a good time in Portrait of Ruin. You know, after they like, I always think about the ending of the Death Dracula fight. That's pretty cool. When Charlotte's like, they're both just like happy. They're kind of like happy and cocky. They're not really like upset or distressed or anything like that. Shanoa's much more dour, but that's okay actually, because that matches the change in art style, because the Portrait of Ruin has a much more sort of anime looking art style to it, and this is sort of going to something a little bit more sober and grounded, which I think works with the way that the story goes too. I mean, it's not like Portrait of Ruin doesn't have some heavy stuff going on in it, but just the attitudes of the protagonist are very, very different. Would he, though? This is a funny part. He says, let's go to the forbidden room, and then they just go to the other part of the room they're already in. That line probably could have used some changes. But my hot big brother's ghost told me not to. This is why that first, like, the first part of the prologue, where it's, like, before she loses her memories, is kind of important, because it contextualizes, like, what Albus is doing there, and, like, what he's talking about when he's like, oh, I gotta go do something. Oh, shit. He's crazy. He's fucking bonkers. Yeah, if you... in the bad ending, you get put in the room, and then, like, you can't leave until you use Dominus, and then using the Dominus Glyph Union kills you, and that's, like, the bad ending. And Barlow looks kind of crazy for a second, and then after the fade to black, it shows, like, all the villagers you didn't rescue to show you, like, here's what you were supposed to do. So this fight is pretty neat. It's not as cool as the Albus fight, but it is, I would say, it's a very demanding fight. You have to do a lot of different things. You kind of have to, and actually, this was a fight that I really wanted to no damage, because I really wanted to no damage the Albus fight. That ended up being okay, because I killed him with the kick to the face instead of the no damage, and I was like, ah, that's good enough. But with this, I really wanted to no damage Barlow if I couldn't no damage Albus. And that fire attack is kind of the hardest one to dodge, because you can't really run across the whole room to dodge the whole thing. This attack's really hard to dodge too, because he just kind of like flies around. All you can really do when he does that is just walk up against the wall and be prepared to double jump, and usually he won't hit you. I can't really say it's a sure thing, but that's kind of the best option available to you. And then with the fire attack, like, there's a certain point of time where you have to jump and dive kick to just kind of get out of the way of the fireballs, and that's really the part where it's hairy. But the really tricky part is that attack there, because if you don't absorb that glyph and you let him get the attack off, and he shoots out these two projectiles that kind of like bounce around the room all over the place, and they're practically impossible to dodge. What you're really supposed to do there is just absorb the glyph. So what that means, and the reason that that's tricky is because Barlow's constantly floating above you, so you constantly want to be jumping, but if you just keep jumping and attacking him, you won't be able to absorb the glyph in time before he gets it off. So like whenever he shows up and pauses, you kind of have to be ready to absorb it whenever he shows up like that. And then here's his big finishing combo attack, which is, like, pretty scary to dodge, honestly. The way that I'm doing it there, just running away from him and then double jumping, it seems like it works pretty well, but but you really kind of have to be fast, and it's even scarier on hard mode. On hard mode, he'll, like, get right up in your face, and you can, like, you'll, like, barely dodge him. So I would say those are the two toughest attacks to deal with, are the attacks where you have to absorb the glyph in order to avoid it, and then when he does his punching attack, everything else is, like... I mean, the lightning attack, the thing about the lightning attack is that, like, sometimes it might hit you, but the correct solution is very easy, and it has a very high success rate. And he should be dying pretty soon here. This is actually also really scary. When he does the fire attack in the middle of the room, that's, like, you have to, because you don't want to be caught up against the wall while he's still shooting fireballs at you. That's how you get hit, and that's how you fuck up your no damage. Another thing about his punching attack is that he can actually hit you with that multiple times. Like, if he punches you once, he can, like, follow it up with, like, another and another, like, this big combo attack. You do have a window to get out of it, but, There have been times before when I've just been like wombo comboed by him, and he hits you really hard. You didn't see it because that was a no damage, but as the bosses do in Order of Ecclesia, that hits you. He will hit you like super, super, super hard. Oh man. Ah, so the secret society was actually evil the whole time. Turns out they're actually secretly Satan worshippers. Because of nutcases like you. Come on, man. Turns out that just like in real life, clandestine societies are all secretly Luciferian cults. Who could have guessed? This part's kind of weird. I like that. I like that laugh though. Word of Ecclesia is they use their voices sparingly. When they do show up, it's very impactful. Now you might be wondering, if he could just do that to release Dracula, why didn't he do that before? Why did he go through the whole Shanoa glyph song and dance? You know, it doesn't matter. Like, there's not really an answer. It's just, but it's all good for me because it facilitates the coolest part of the whole game, the best part of the whole game, which is now Dracula's castle is here. It's ready. It's time. So this is where the game, in my opinion, really, really gets good. Is once you're in Dracula's castle, once you're in this environment of really interesting combat challenges, one after the other. Because there are parts of the, like I said before, there are parts of the early game, there are parts of the outdoor areas that drag. A lot of the outdoor areas are not that interesting. They're kind of just like flat plains without much in the way of like verticality or like positioning. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously, but it's either like one or the other. It's either like the mountains with like the bridges and the ledges, which are just kind of like painful, or it's just like the Oblivion Ridge, which is like flat ground and nothing else. Dracula's castle has some interesting decisions you can make about where to stand and how to take advantage of that, and also asks you to think more in I almost said 3 dimensions, but I guess it would be shit. Okay, I gotta cut that out. I accidentally slapped my microphone. Okay, I'm gonna write that down actually. Fuck. Microphone. Slap. 3rd section of commentary. Okay. Alright. Yeah, so that's why the reason I don't go back to the Heartwell in the village after fighting Barlow, even though I definitely want full hearts for Dracula's castle, is because there's a heart expansion right there. I don't really need it. Look at this. Fucking great music. You're in Dracula's castle. This is so fucking good. And those Black Panthers are actually pretty scary to fight. They really go fast. I guess I should explain what the white drops are. The white drops, and like there's like white drops, green drops, black drops. I never actually used them. I kept on meaning to, but I just forgot every time. I think they increase your attribute points for different schools of magic, and I haven't even explained what attribute points are. I don't think. Basically, the more you use a certain type of attack, the more damage it will do. And it's like sharp attack, stabbing attacks, blunt attacks, and then all the different schools of magic. The more you use them, the more damage they do. Now, that might sound like a temptation to farm, but really, it's a very gradual. It's a very gradual increase. It's not really like practical to try to farm attribute points unless you're a total psycho. So it's just kind of like an incidental thing, and that was really the way they had to do it. Because if it was super impactful, I think it would be tempting to farm them. But I think white drops just create a permanent increase to the attribute points. So I really should have used them, but I just always forgot. So whatever. They're either a permanent increase of attribute points, like minorly, or they're like a temporary buff, like a cooldown. I don't really know which one they are. The wording on the item description doesn't make that totally clear to me. But I just didn't use them because I just forgot every time. Oh well. God, this game is so fucking sick. Also, I think I said in a previous video that I thought Dawn of Sorrow was going to be like peak lewdness for Castlevania, but those Black Panther enemies are pretty fucking lewd. Same with the tiger ladies from earlier. Look at this shit. God, this is so like, oh my god. The gameplay in this game is so fucking like, it's so cool. Like, just the jumping and like the rapid fire lance shots to just like, oh man. And that's really cool too. That because what I'm doing there is I'm stabbing, then backdashing, then crouching to cancel the backdash, then stabbing again. So that way I can keep hitting them at their altitude, like really fast over and over again. Like, and the thing is that like doing things like crouching to cancel a backdash, that's been possible since like Symphony of the Night. I know it's at least possible in Harmony of Dissonance, but like I never had to do it before. In this game, it's like, because it's one thing to give the player a tool, right? But it's another thing to tell the player, I'm going to reward you for using this tool. You know what I mean? Like that was kind of the big problem really with Symphony of the Night, is that Symphony of the Night gave you this massive toolbox and then never really demanded that you use all of them. Like there's never really punishes you for not engaging with all the systems that are in place. Order of Ecclesia is much better about concretely rewarding you for like using the glyph system and using all of the different movement tools that are available to you, like the dive kicking to bounce off of people's heads. Like again, excuse me, sorry. Again, like dive kicking to bounce off of people's heads, that's been possible since Symphony of the Night, but Order of Ecclesia is the only time when the game like really made me do it, right? And it's still a little bit inconsistent. Like sometimes it feels like you really should be bouncing off of someone's head and you just kind of like slide off of it and bump into them. This boss fight is really weird. You can't kill him through damage. You have to absorb the glyph while he passes through the wall. And I actually didn't understand that the first time I played the game, because the first time I played this game, I didn't understand that you could steal glyph attacks from enemies. I really should have, because they make it very clear when enemies use glyph attacks. And I really should have put together that like that's a glyph. Oh, maybe I can steal that, like I can steal I can take the glyphs in the open world. But I just didn't put that together. I'm interested to see what I do here. Yeah, this is where lightning really comes in handy, is dealing with the Tin Men in this part of the game. The Tin Men, incidentally, also Symphony of the Night. Speaking of Symphony of the Night, first appeared in Symphony of the Night. I would say basically as tough to kill here. Tougher to kill here, actually, than they are in Symphony of the Night. Because in Symphony of the Night, they tended to ask you to fight those guys in environments with more verticality, where it was like they'd be up on a ledge, you'd be below them, so you could kind of like jump up and like hit them from below. There's going to be a few spots like that also in later parts of this castle, but in this library, they really ask you... They ask you several times to try to fight those guys just on a flat stretch of ground, and that is really tough, because they're super fast and their axe swings go super high into the air, so it's very, very difficult to dodge them. But that's kind of what you have to do, right? It's just like, just kill them super fast. I actually could have used a Glyph Union there while... Because that particular fight back there where you have to fight the Draculina and the Tin Man at the same time is like trying to rub your stomach and pat your head. It's like... Because you're supposed to jump over the Tin Man, and then there's the Draculina flying around in the sky saying you can't be in the sky, so it's really hard, and I could have Glyph Unioned there, but I didn't really think I had to, and I want a Glyph Union later on, because the way that I'm partitioning out my Glyph Unions is based on the availability of heart expansions. So I don't want to... Yeah, this is how you really should deal with them. Is the light-dark Glyph Union. I think it's called Eternitus or something, or it's some Latin word. But the light magic plus dark magic Glyph Union does 1,000,000 damage and will always like kill them or get them, or more accurately get them into that state where they're just standing still and shooting, and then you can just shoot Umbra and Vol Illuminatio at them from a position of absolute safety and kill them. And that's really the best option for dealing with them when you're in a position to have some height on them. That would probably also work for the Draculina plus Tin Man combat, because I would be surprised. I mean, I don't know how much damage it does to the Draculina. That's the problem. I don't know if Eternatus would one-shot her or not. And here you can actually just jump right over them if you dive kick off of the chandeliers. It's kind of the only way to get enough horizontal distance on them to not get caught by them there. Yeah, I didn't realize you could steal glyphs for a long time. Which is important, because that's how you get some really good glyphs. Like Umbra and Vol Illuminatio are both steel glyphs, and a lot of magic glyphs are like that. So that's a really important thing to understand, and that's also how you don't get hit by the ricochet attack in the Barlow fight. And here, I think I'm not as confident with my jump over to the chandelier in this part from like this height. So here I just kill them, and yeah, I'm planning my Glyph Unions around the availability of heart expansions, because I don't want to go back to the village in between every section of the castle to rejuvenate my hearts. I'd rather just be a little bit more conservative and strategic with my Glyph Unions, because I think it's more interesting tactically, and it's also just better for the footage, because it means that I'm not constantly interrupting my journey through Dracula's castle to like fuck off back to the village and spam crouch in front of a little thing in the village square. So this way it's more continuous, it's more interesting, it's more difficult. It's just better all around. Here I don't have to Glyph Union, because I have this little ledge. And it's actually faster here to have two Vol Illuminatio instead of a Vol Illuminatio and an Umbra, because the projectiles move faster. Where is he? Come on. Where are you? That's the pheasant from Portrait of Ruin. That's the pheasant from the fucking dinner table in the Stella Loretta fight in Portrait of Ruin. I'd recognize that pheasant anywhere. Sorry. Yeah, and just figuring out actually that I could, because for a long time I was thinking of it. I was thinking of the glyph, the two-hand glyph system as like magic in one hand and then a weapon in the other. But then I kind of realized at a certain point, wait, there's no reason I can't have magic in both hands to like double the amount of magic damage I'm doing. So why not do that? And that's what I mean when I say that the glyph system is interesting and that it rewards experimentation and it rewards like. And that's also why having the different preset glyphs is so important. So this room in the library is pretty tricky, because there's a Tin Man somewhere over to the right, but I don't know exactly how far into the room I have to go before he's activated. Oh shit. Okay, that was a mistake. What I was trying to do there was do another Glyph Union. Wow, 50 hearts? Well, no wonder I'm being conservative with it. That makes sense though, because that Glyph Union does like 1,000,000 damage. I think that's probably the highest damage Glyph Union in the game. Universalis, not Eternatus. Universalis. And there I fucked up because I forgot that I had two Vol Illuminatio on, so I ended up using the double light magic Glyph Union, which is not as good as the light plus dark Glyph Union. Another thing that's treacherous in some ways so to speak rather, about Glyph Unions, is that if you start using them but you don't finish them, like if you start using them but then you get interrupted by damage, you won't finish it. It'll get interrupted and it'll distract the hearts from your heart count, but you won't actually pull it off. And that random drop from the Draculina was actually really, really good, because there's a boss fight that's going to come up. The next boss fight that I go to, I'm going to be using only magic on. So I want like a full int set, if I can get it, for that. And that hat buffs your... I don't get as much strength, but I buff my int by like 6. I think I'm standing here to... I think I was checking the time. So I think there's going to be a cut coming up here, and I wanted to see how much time I had left, yeah. And again, if I was super min-maxing, like if I really wanted like a good full int set, I would have done the lesbian tailor ladies quests to get some robes from the shop, but like, it's whatever. And I'm glad that these are the kind of decisions I'm free to make about whether I want to spend my time to do that or not. Wonderful. And to clarify what I mean by that, what I mean is like, I'm glad that the game doesn't go, oh, sorry, you can't get the best ending until you do all, 50 fucking thousand of these quests. And there's another difference, actually, between the Large Cavern and the Nest of Evil, which, again, I'm gonna have to wait to talk about until I actually get to the Large Cavern, because that's what would make the most sense to talk about it. So, we are coming up now on what is going to be, the last, like, big power boost you get in this game, the sort of last really, really important tool you get before you get to the end of the game. Although, actually, before that, I'm going to have this last room here. So one thing about Order of Ecclesia that I don't like, and this is a very specific thing, is these rooms with the ghouls that come out of the ground, because it's so easy to just, like, be like walking through the room, just like trying to get through it, and then a ghoul pops up right in front of you and you walk into him. So I just kind of wish I understood how their spawns work. Because I really don't, and I feel like everything I try to, I've just never been able to get any conclusive data on that. Incidentally, those big eye monster things are a good example of how you make the movement patterns of those big eye monsters, or rather, the movement patterns of those eye monsters, manageable as you make them themselves big targets. So what I just got right there, the Natisco Soul, or the Nabisco Soul, the Nabisco Soul, is like the best, I would say probably the best spell in the game. Especially due to when in the game you get it, and how it interacts with everything else. So first of all, it has a really good glyph union. If you use the Nabisco Soul with any weapon, you get like this big lightsaber attack, which you guys are going to see eventually. It's a really long range. It does really good damage, but really the thing that makes the Nabisco Soul really good is its typing. Or it's the kind of damage that it does, rather. Where it does flame damage and light damage, and a whole bunch of enemies are weak to either one or both of those. Including the next boss that's coming up here, and Death, and Dracula. So that's super important. And it just, like, it fires out, like, right in front of you, so you don't have to worry about it, like, missing anything. Basically, if you're facing towards something, if you're pointing it at something, it's probably going to hit it. And it has a pretty good broad range. So that's super important. The Nova Skeletons here, the reason that I keep absorbing their glyphs is because there's not a heart expansion between me and the next boss. So what I want to do is I want to just restore as many hearts as I can before I get to the boss, because I don't want to go back to the village to use the well, as I said before. So I'm just kind of taking some hearts from these guys as I go, with the hope of getting to the boss with full hearts. If I really wanted to, I could sit and farm one of those guys over and over again, like keep absorbing 10, like keep getting them to start using their attack and then absorbing the glyph 10 hearts at a time until I'm at full hearts, but that's not really necessary. Rather, it's not necessary, period. This part of the game, this is probably my least favorite part of the castle. Because it's all just a bunch of... it's only really made tolerable because of the fact that you get the Netesco soul here. It's kind of a lot of like bland hallways, and the music is not very good, which is unusual for Order of Ecclesia. This is the kind of track that like wouldn't be out of place at all in a game like, I feel like Symphony of the Night or something, or like Portrait of Ruin, but with Order of Ecclesia and its absolute like S tier soundtrack, having something that's like this boring is unusual. So those are the Mercury boots, which when I got the Mercury boots in Portrait of Ruin, in case you guys didn't see it, they make you run faster. When I got the Mercury boots in Portrait of Ruin, I used them until I got the winged boots, and in this run, I'm not going to be using them for very long, because I'm going to get the Black Panther... This game's equivalent to the Black Panther Soul, which is called Rapidus Fio, and if you don't know what the Black Panther Soul is, when I get Rapidus Fio, you'll see what it does, and you'll see why it means that I don't need to have the Mercury boots on anymore. I think I am going to do a little bit of like inefficient routing here to try to get full hearts, because if I can't get literally full hearts, I want full hearts to the nearest multiple of 25, because the double Netesco Glyph Union is, I'm fairly sure, 25 hearts. So this is like a thing that I never quite got 100% down, is how many times exactly do I need to absorb hearts from the Nova Skeletons before I'm good, and basically one more time, because I think I can get, well, I guess no, 2 more times. Oh no, I am at max hearts. Okay. Well, wait a minute. If I'm only looking for multiples of 25, maybe I didn't need to do that. I think the double Netesco Glyph Union is 25. I guess we'll find out. So this boss is really interesting. He's essentially a really stringent positioning check. There's not really much in the way of like wiggle room in terms of how you fight him. All of his attacks pretty much have one correct answer, and he's basically just making sure that you can react in time to do that. When he shoots the triple fireballs like that, those attacks are important because that triple fireball attack where he hits the back wall is really... Oh, it's 20. Okay, so I did need to get full. When he hits the back wall, that's the only attack that you can't dodge without just shoving your back up against the wall. But what's tricky is that he has 2 different fireball attacks, one that will hit the back wall and one that will hit right in front of the back wall. But if you go far enough forward, then that same position will dodge both of his fireball patterns. So even though the telegraphs for the different fireball patterns are slightly different, you don't necessarily need to appraise that in order to react correctly to it. You can just go to the same spot for both fireball patterns. And that was over super fast because I'm pretty sure he's weak to either flame or light. And, sorry, I'm a little bit, it's allergy season out here and I'm a little bit congested. So the fact that I was going in with a double Netesco Soul and I was just like dumping all my hearts into him meant that he died super fast. And the reason I didn't use my hearts until the halfway point is because... The reason I didn't use my hearts immediately is because when you get him down to half HP, his attacks start becoming more complicated. And I'm not sure if you really noticed that. That whole fight was just kind of like a massive, giant purple lasers flying across the screen. But, like for example, instead of doing like one... he has an attack in his first phase where he'll like grab at you. And then in the second phase, he'll do that. Instead of grabbing at you once, he'll grab at you like 3 times. So instead of just jumping to dodge it, you have to jump to dodge the first one, then duck to dodge the second one, then jump again to dodge the third one. So his attacks just become more complicated and more difficult to dodge once he hits half health, so that's why I saved my my Glyph Unions for that point of the fight. And this little secret area back here serves 2 functions. Number 1, it gives you access to the large cavern and the training hall, which I'm going to do both of. And number 2, it's where you find the Rapidus Fio. I think I might have accidentally implied earlier that you can't get the large cavern without doing quests. You can. This is how you get it, but the only quest that I'm doing that matters to me is the quest that you go into the large cavern to do, and even then, I really don't have to do that quest. I'm really just kind of doing it, mostly to show you guys the large cavern, because it is pretty funny. So yeah, this is Rapidus Vio / Black Panther Soul. It's called the Black Panther Soul in Aria of Sorrow. It does basically the same thing, where you go super fast, and you have this, like, shockwave around you, which will damage things, but unless you're running into something and killing it, you can't just run through enemies with it. It doesn't make you invincible. And it's part of what makes this part of the game really, really fun, is that now that you have, like, the Natesco Soul and Rapidus Vio, now the game is, like... It's super fast-paced, and you now never encounter a problem that you can't deal with. So this is like the best part of the whole game. This is what really elevates Order of Ecclesia, is this incredible late game. Because giving you the Black Panther Soul... I'm just going to call it the Black Panther Soul. Giving you the Black Panther Soul... so the reason I didn't duck down there, I should explain that, is because the way that you beat these Nova Skeletons is you have to duck under their laser attack. And because I haven't gotten hit by any of them yet, you guys don't know this, but the gimmick with the... Not the gimmick, but the way the Nova Skeletons work is that their attack has a big wind-up, but it does a ton of damage. And I mean a fucking ton of damage. Like, even on normal mode, they hit you super fucking hard. And the way that you deal with that on normal mode is by ducking underneath them. But in order to duck underneath their shots, you need to be either on an even plane with them and ducking, or you need to be, like, below them. So trying to fight two of them at different points of elevation is not a good idea, which is the situation that I found myself back there, which is why I, like, backed off and exited and re-entered the room to reset their spawn positions, because one of them had fallen down into a spot that I just really didn't like the look of, and it was safer to just reset and try to approach them again. On hard mode, you actually can't duck under their lasers. Their lasers are, like, much wider in front of them, and you just have to, like, either kill them before they attack at all, or somehow avoid them. And you'll see how I deal with that in my hard mode video. But yeah, the Black Panther Soul. So, movement in video games is really important, and it's always fun. Like, it always feels better to move faster. One of the things about Harmony of Dissonance that I really, really praised, and that I'm going to bring up again, is the fact that, you know, Circle of the Moon's movement was very kind of awkward and sluggish and kind of stiff. And Harmony of Dissonance, even though it did bring back, like, Belmont-style fixed jumping arcs, it also let you go super fast. Like, you can in Symphony of Light, you can backdash. In Harmony of Dissonance, you can backdash or forward dash from the very beginning of the game. So you can go, like, super fast from the very start. It's part of why that game is so good. And here, they didn't let you go super fast from the very start, but by giving you the Black Panther Soul before the game is basically over, which is what... Aria of Sorrow gives you the Black Panther Soul for the last 2 boss fights in, like, the last area, which is not really a very big zone. And then Dawn of Sorrow is even worse. Dawn of Sorrow doesn't give you the Black Panther Soul until literally the end boss fight, which is almost useless on, because the end boss fight is not, like... You don't really get to zoom around a lot when you fight Menace in Dawn of Sorrow. Anyway, oh, and if you start New Game Plus, you don't retain the Black Panther Soul. So... that alone would have made me... Because I thought about for a second there, before I uploaded any of my Portrait of Ruin videos, I thought about going back and doing Dawn of Sorrow New Game Plus, and then uploading that, just because, like, I tried Portrait of Ruin New Game Plus, but I never tried Dawn of Sorrow New Game Plus, and I wanted to be fair, and I was like, well, if they let me keep the Black Panther Soul and use it the whole time, then I'll do it, but they didn't, so, oh well. And also, what makes Rapidus Vio so good is that this actually frees up the leg slot. And you can actually make that whole jump. You can actually do that in one jump. You can clear that room in one double jump there with Rapidus Vio. I just didn't quite make it. Yeah, it frees up the leg slot, because Rapidus Vio doesn't care what your base movement speed is. It only brings you up to a set speed. And the reason I'm using Glyph Unions here is just because there's going to be a hard expansion before the next boss, and I just... Oh no, there it is. That's the heart expansion right there. So I just wanted to make sure I was using my hearts as much as I could, but I'm probably not going to be using them that much after this, because the next boss I really want all my hearts for. Okay, I'm still using it a little bit, which is good. You wouldn't want to... Because all enemies, if they're dropping hearts, if they don't drop hearts, they're going to drop money, and I'm not using money for anything, so... You should try to never be at full hearts, unless you're really close to a boss fight that you know you want all your hearts for. You should always try to be using them. And that's something that I'm really bad about in video games, and I think I already talked about how when I first played this game, that was what I did, and that was part of why I did this second run and recorded it, is because I was better with my hearts. So this is a demonstration of that. So yeah, in Aria of Sorrow and Aria of Dawn of Sorrow, they give you this, and in Portrait of Ruin actually, you don't get the speed up spell from Charlotte until right before the Dracula and Death fight, which admittedly it's actually pretty useful for, and which I probably could have used on at least my Jonathan runs, instead of like what I ended up. I think I used plus int as the Charlotte buff. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. What those other games did was they have this awesome tool that makes the game really fun, but they don't give it to you until the game is pretty much over. And what you have instead is the winged boots or the mercury boots. Here they give you this really great tool, which means that you can free up the leg slot for something that actually makes you stronger in combat. Because the thing is that the only real competition, I think Jesus fucking Christ, fucking asshole. The back slot is sort of is I think underutilized, or at least I underutilize it for most of my Order of Ecclesia runs. So the only thing really that it's competing for here would be Sapiens Theo, the int buff, and a lot of the enemies in this part of the game are weak to slash damage, so I don't want to be like plinking away at them with the Netesco Soul. I just want to stab them. And even on enemies that would take more damage from Netesco, like these robots, it's still kind of faster in some cases to do like big chunks of damage with the lance than it is to like plink away at them with the Netesco. And what I'm doing here is I'm using both, so that way if I encounter a robot, I can just Netesco them. If I encounter a lizard man, I can Melio Hosta them. Yeah, I forgot to point that out too. I got the last lance upgrade. So now, Rapidus Fire, Rapidus Theo, Melio Hosta, Netesco. Now I'm at like max power, and this is going to be what's going to get me through most of the rest of the game. I'm going to swap up my glyphs for the next boss, but I'll talk about that when I get there. Also, I want to point out the music that's playing right now is a remix of Tower of Dolls from Castlevania Chronicles. The first remix of this track that I've heard, and it's a pretty good track. So, unlike the previous games where the original songs are not that good and the remixes of old songs are the highlights, in this game, the new songs are good and the remix of old songs are also good. This room is, well, I'll have to talk about it in my hard mode video. This room is really tricky. Yeah, and trying to kill the imps with Netesco instead of Melio Hosta is a real pain in the ass. And as you can see, there's nothing stopping me from weaving in both of them if I want to kill one of these guys. So this way I just have all the tools that I need. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention why that's important. It's because the leg slot that Rapidus Theo opens up means I can use the Valkyrie Greaves, and a lot of the endgame armor that's naturally available inside of Dracula's castle buffs your strength and buffs your like physical damage. So it's like you get to Rapidus Theo means you get to take advantage of all those pieces of armor, basically. Oh, I forgot to... What am I... Yeah, there we go. Okay. I think I'm keeping the Stephanie on just because I don't have the Valkyrie Mask yet. The Valkyrie Mask is coming up here. And because I'm still, like, doing... Oh, no, the Valkyrie Mask isn't going to be until later. Okay. I am still... just because I am still using, like, Netesco here and there to kill armors, so it's still benefiting me. More than any of the other armor I could put in that slot would, so... What am I doing here? Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then this is the even better... And then that's another reason why I'm keeping Stephanie on, because I have this double Nintesco loadout ready to go whenever I want. Because these guys, like, you want to kill them as fast as possible, because their attacks are pretty tough to dodge. Even on normal mode. On hard mode, they're even harder to dodge, but with, like, a lot of cases in Order of Ecclesia, really the best way to fight enemies is just kill them before they attack you. Which, like, that's, I mean, if you can do it, that's always the best way to beat enemies, but in Order of Ecclesia, I feel like they emphasize that more. The Spectral Swords make their return from Portrait of Ruin, just as fucking obnoxious to fight as before. But now I have But now I have this giant purple lightsaber Glyph Union, so not a very big deal there. And that's a pretty obvious place to use Glyph Unions, because there is not another hard expansion between here and the next boss, but there are lots of, like, miscellaneous glyphs sitting around that I don't use. Yeah, this guy is a real big reason to have Emilio Hosta ready and to have lots of buffs to your physical attack, because he's weak to slash, and you kind of want to kill him. He's one of those annoying Order of Ecclesia enemies who just walks at you and puts you on, like, this, basically this DPS timer where, because he's just walking towards you and all you have behind you is a wall, you kind of have to kill him in a certain span of time. Which I don't really like, because I feel like I guess I don't like being put in the position where I have no options other than that. And also, in some instances where it does that, you don't really have time to kill them before they get to you, but... Well, you do if you have hearts for your Glyph Unions, but like I think I already covered, I think I already talked about this a while ago, I don't like being told when to use my Glyph Unions. I like to be able to make that decision. And this skeleton with a huge axe is, it's weird. Sometimes, yeah, I just avoid these guys, because it's either I jump and I try to, like, miracle hit them with Emilio Hosta, or I waste hearts on a Glyph Union, and I don't want to do either. So here I'm setting up my my glyphs for this next boss. This next boss asks for Emilio Scutum. Scutum? Scutum? It's Latin. I don't remember my Latin pronunciation. Sorry, guys. Actually, nobody really knows how Latin was pronounced, because obviously there are no native Latin speakers anymore. But I'm sure there's a correct way to do things. I'm sure a Catholic priest would know how to pronounce every Latin word and would have a correct and an incorrect pronunciation in mind. I don't know what that is for the shield glyph, so I'm just going to call it the shield glyph. You have to use the shield glyph for this guy. And this guy is a gigantic pain in the ass to fight. This first phase is pretty straightforward once you... But, like, it's really the kind of thing that's much better to do if you have Emilio Scutum, if you have the shield glyph, because it lets you block those arrows from his crossbow. And basically the point of the fight is eventually you want to get on his back to hit his glowing weak point behind his head. But before you do that, what you need to do is you need to get behind him. In order to do that, you have to break his knees in the front, then break his knees in the front to get behind him, then break his knees in the back to get him to, like, stumble over so you can climb on his back, so you can get to his head, so you can hit his weak point. But that's what you have to do. What you want to do, though, is you want to kill both of these crossbows that he has on his body, because otherwise, when you're on his back hitting his weak point, he's like tries to shake you off and does different attacks to get rid of you, but also if you have left any of the crossbows up, the crossbows will be shooting at you while you're trying to dodge his attacks while you're on his back, and it's just a big fucking mess, and it's almost impossible to do cleanly. Yeah, this part sucks, because you're basically, like... This boss does something that actually Menace did in Dawn of Sorrow that really pissed me off, which is things in the background... It's like things contextually existing in the background. Like, sometimes things in the background... Like, you'd think that because you can run into... You'd think that the legs that are highlighted right? Like the ones that aren't in shadow are like the ones that you need to worry about. And you can run into those, but you can also run into the legs in the background. So it's like, it's 3D, but it isn't really, and it's just kind of hard to remind yourself of that. Or it's like you feel like if something's in the background, you should be able to walk past it and it shouldn't be able to hit you, but it's not actually in the background. So this part is actually a lot better than the first part, because what you can do here is when instead of waiting for the crossbow attack, you can just get up on his tail and attack the crossbow directly once you break his back knees, and then before you... Because you can run up onto his back as soon as you break those back knees, but it's smart to take the time to destroy this crossbow instead for the reasons I already talked about. He was very nice to me this time because he only ever did the kick attack while I was behind him, and he can do 3 attacks. He can either kick you, he can have the crossbow shoot at you, or he can shoot like that little spike out of his tail towards you. The kick is definitely the easiest attack to dodge, and there that's all he did, so I didn't really have to worry about any of that. And now I'm going to start on the actual third phase of the fight, what I think of as the third phase, which is when you're on his back. And this is the hardest part. This is the hardest part of the fight, because you have very little time to get into the correct position to react to the different attacks that he does. And the solution, basically, is to be aggressive enough with him, because if you do enough damage to his eye, then he'll always do that like, throwing back attack right there. And the solution to that is always the same, and because he does that attack based off of the damage you deal to him, you can kind of predict when he's going to do it. Like, if you do the fight enough times, you know, okay, after every 2 glyph unions, he's going to try to throw me off, so I already know to get towards the back of his back, basically. But if you can't reliably trigger that attack where he tries to throw you off, then he can do several other attacks, all of which are asking you to get into different positions, and all of which... have different... And all of which are very... You have to react to them very fast, and not doing them correctly can be very punishing. Like, there's one where if he... Where he can, like, shoot his tail at you, he can, like, knock you off with his tail, and that will land you right in front of him. So you have to do, like, phase 1, you have to, like, kill both pairs of knees again, and it's just... And you have to, like... go back underneath him again. It's just a giant pain in the ass. It's very, very annoying. But fortunately there, I went in with full hearts. I knew what I wanted. This is so weird. So the reason I backed off there is because I thought that the skeleton guy was about to do a big axe attack, and then he didn't. I guess he was just backing up way far to use it. And here I'm going back up to the tower of, I'm going back up to the clock tower. I forget what it's called in this game. I also want to point out the music that plays here and in the Arms Depot is fucking sick, too. It's called Ebony Wings. It's fucking amazing. One thing I would say about the soundtrack in Order of Ecclesia is that I like the Albus boss fight music is like the coolest shit ever. The Barlow boss fight music is pretty good. The boss fight music against like the Goliath and the Rascala, pretty damn good. The boss fight music for the guys in Dracula's castle, I'm not really a fan. It doesn't quite work for me. It feels like this is where the music should be more climactic, and instead it feels more like... I don't know. There are parts of it I like, but I don't really like it a lot on the whole, and it's definitely outclassed by other boss themes throughout the game. Yeah, those lizard men, well... On hard mode, fighting them is a different story, but I'm gonna have to wait to talk about that. Clock tower. Clock tower, clock tower. So, that was just a brain freeze. The way you're supposed to do this part is you're supposed to angle towards the left, or left or right, but not actually release it until the little magnet node hits the bottom, because that will bump the arrow up a little bit. So that way you don't launch yourself into the spikes. There, I just kind of forgot. I mean, this part is stressful. Like, this part is pretty fucking scary, but it's not nearly as scary as it is in a hard mode, because in the grand hard mode tradition, when you do this level on hard, all the Medusa heads petrify you. Here, that's not the case, of course, so... Still scary. Still, I would say this is probably one of the few places, really, that... Because, like I said, Order of Ecclesia is a lot like Portrait of Ruin, where... I would say that the regular enemies in Order of Ecclesia are definitely more threatening than the regular enemies in Portrait of Ruin. I'm talking about normal mode here. But, like in Portrait of Ruin, mostly what's going to kill you are the bosses. And, this place is an exception, as is often the case. The combination of Medusa heads and then environmental hazards. In fact, let's see if that happened. No, I think no, because I don't think I get. No, it's not here. Sorry, I can't quite remember what happens on hard and what happens on normal. Are they all petrified Medusa heads here? Yeah, they are. Damn, that's crazy. So in that one room, they all petrify you, but usually that's not the case. Dude, this is like Rapidus Fio is so fucking cool. Like, that's the only reason I was able to like fight that guy the way that I was able to fight the way that I was able to fight him, because of Rapidus Fio. I could like jump over his head. Otherwise, you would have to like I would have to use Glyph Unions there. And here I'm breaking my rule, unfortunately. I'm going back to the village to use the little heart thing, which I really didn't want to do, but unfortunately I don't really have a choice, because next up is the death fight. And as far as death fights go, this one is okay, but I never really learned how to do it super elegantly on Shinoa. In Albus mode, I did. In Shinoa mode, or the regular base game, it basically ends up becoming a DPS race. Although this is actually an example of when Rapidus Fio's combat properties, or rather I should say when the shockwave damage is important, because the scythes will get destroyed by the smallest quantity of damage. So if you ever want to clear out scythes during the death fight with Rapidus Fio, you just fucking run into them and they'll get destroyed. And I think I was hoping for a no damage here. I don't think I'm gonna get it, because eventually, sooner or later, because like I didn't practice. Yeah, no, this is the part where I fuck up and he hits me somehow. Yeah, that attack, I feel like I never got a good grasp on how to handle that attack, and that could have been a no damage if I just played the swirly skull attack correctly. But I got scared and I thought that I didn't like trust that I'd be able to run in between them in the right timing, so I just like went for what I thought was the safe option, which was backing off and just outranging it completely. But then I got cornered, and he ended up doing something that I didn't expect him to do and that I wasn't ready to react to, and I lost out on the no damage, which I'm pretty upset about. Well, I'm not that upset. I'm disappointed, because I no damaged Eligor, which is the big robot guy. I no damaged Blackmore, who is the shadow guy, and that was almost. I'm mostly just disappointed because that was almost a no damage. Like, that could have been a no damage if I just played slightly better. Oh well. Oh well. And I'll talk more about that fight and how it works in later commentaries, because like there's honestly not much to say about it. It's like, it's just chaos. Like, he's just constantly summoning scythes and throwing them at you, until he stops to do, like, one of two attacks with pretty simple solutions to them. Yeah, there's not really much to say. It's just kind of just like a shit show. Not a shit show isn't badly designed. Okay, now I actually have to fight cave trolls. And that's why I put on the Valkyrie mask. That's why I was suddenly very worried about how much melee damage I was doing, is because they're weak to slash, so that's what you want to fight them with. I mean, they're weak to fire too, but 3 melee Hosta shots is easier to kill them. Kills them faster than like the damage over time with the Natesco Soul. So I needed to make sure that I was doing enough damage with my melee weapons to kill them before they could get any attacks off. Ugh. And now we're gonna go to hell. Turns out hell is guarded by Medusa heads that petrify you. Who could have guessed? Yep, there it is. I was always terrified of like somehow dying here, like getting petrified and then like getting chain petrified and like whittled down one bump at a time. So, the final approach. There are a couple of parts of this area that are really scary. It's much scarier on hard mode, as is all too often the case, but I would say this part, I would say, functions really well as just like a test of your ability to adapt and react quickly in combat. Like things like that right there. Like, okay, there's a lizard man ahead of you, but also we're going to spawn 2 imps like almost directly above you. How do you deal with that? You know what I mean? Here you want a cramped room with 2 ruler swords, which is why I'm not just running past them, because I have a feeling the second one is too close to the ground for me to really like just run straight past. And the reason I'm using glyph unions is because there is going to be a heart expansion between me and Dracula. Yeah, this room, I'm going to go back there, but that room is the real scary room. And that room actually is the way to Dracula, but I'm going back over here to get a very, very important back glyph. Because as cool as Rapidus Fio is, I'm actually not going to be having it. I'm not going to wear it for the Dracula fight, which I'll explain when we get there. But I'm going to go get something very important. Some of you guys might have noticed, perhaps, if you're comparing this game with the rest of the DS trilogy, is you might be thinking, wait a minute, you're about to go fight Dracula and you haven't gotten your, like, bat form yet. Well, this is where the bat form is. It's called Velaticus. You get wings when you put it on, and it is extremely, extremely, extremely important for the very, very late game, because that's when you get it. And kind of how I think giving the player Rapidus Fio much earlier than they got, than they ever had before, like giving you the Black Panther Soul much earlier than before, is a really fascinating decision. And it's a really good decision, I should say. I think likewise the decision to not give you a bat form or an owl form until the very end of the game, and to make it much easier to actually use, where you just push one button and then it's done, is like... is so smart. Because every other game that had that, it was always obnoxious to use. Like, one of the biggest problems with Symphony of the Night is the fact that you have to use the bat form so much to traverse the inverted castle. And Alucard's bat form is just tedious. It takes a while to activate, it takes a while to deactivate. You go slow as fuck when you use it, so it's not fun, and you have to use it, like, constantly. In Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow, you were stuck between either keeping the Bat Company soul on instead of some other soul you might have wanted to use, or doing a bunch of menuing to get access to it again. Here, it might seem like it sucks to not get like a flying ability until the very end of the game, but it meant that they couldn't design any levels around it. Do you know what I mean? Like, they had to make all the levels traversable conventionally because of that. Therefore, meaning that you never feel like you are, you never feel like you're forced to get rid of it, or you never feel like you don't ever really feel like you're forced to put it on. Like, it would be so annoying if throughout the late game I had to constantly like swap out Rapidus Fio for Volaticus, but I don't. I am going to use Volaticus in a couple of places, but the point is that they don't. A tool like that would necessitate some kind of extra like futzing with the menus or something like that, and they sidestep that. Even though actually with different glyph setups, it's easier than ever before to just swap to fucking Bat Company. Although actually, I know Aria of Sorrow could do that too. Actually, so I shouldn't actually talk shit about Aria and Dawn of Sorrow with their Bat Company. It's more that like, I don't know. And now I'm gonna, unfortunately, bring the forward momentum to a screeching halt right before we get to Dracula, because it's time to go do the Training Hall and the Large Cavern, the two challenge areas. Why am I standing here? I don't know. And this is gonna be, interesting. I think I'm gonna do the Training Hall first, which is fine, because the Training Hall is the less interesting of the two areas. Meaning I'm saving the best for last.
Hey there.
And what the Training Hall and the Large Cavern are is the Training Hall is basically like a platforming challenge area, and then the Large Cavern is like a combat challenge area. And the reason I waited until after, even though I could have done these any time after I got out of the catacombs, I waited until I got Volaticus. And that's not because the game, they were smart enough to not let you use Volaticus in the Training Hall, which is the platforming area, but Volaticus is extremely important for the Large Cavern. It's kind of like the thing that makes the Large Cavern doable, and I think saves it from becoming something that is either extremely frustrating or, oh, there's a cut here. Interesting. I'm surprised by that. I guess it has been 40 minutes. I don't know. No, but this is all interesting. Usually if I do a cut like that, it's because I'm gonna make multiple video files. But here, apparently, at some point, I decided to combine these. Interesting. Anyway, oh, am I doing the Large Cavern first? I am doing the Large Cavern first. Okay, well, yeah, Volaticus is the thing that saved the Large Cavern from being either extremely frustrating or something that I would probably just skip. Not yet. These first two rooms, these are like real, actual challenge rooms, these first two rooms, where this is actually about, like, correct glyph choice and proper positioning, and this is actually really interesting. Basically, I can't ever stop moving, because he'll keep moving as long as I'm moving, and if he stops moving, he might dive bomb me, which I don't want, or he might try to shoot magic at me, which I can handle, but I also kind of don't want. I just kind of want him to keep moving while I keep moving, so that way I can keep hitting him. And I can't go too far over to the left, because then I'll activate this second guy. And now that I'm not worried about that, I can move around as much as I fucking want, and this guy is, like, no longer a problem. And I want to jump to hit him, but if I jump too much, he's just going to keep on flying further and further up into the air, and eventually go through the ceiling, which is not what I want, so this is also kind of like a... It's a horizontal positioning check, but it's also like a vertical positioning check. But it's mostly just like... but really it's that first guy who's the actual challenge, because you have to keep moving in a very limited space, but once that guy's dead, you're free to just do whatever. And now we get into the utterly ridiculous part of the Large Cavern. So... that guy down there, Mr. Double Hammer, you can't fight those guys. You just can't fight them, because they just fucking run at you at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and then knock you around for 200 or 300 damage. Like, they do so much fucking damage. And they just run at you. And they're too tall to double jump over. And... you can't avoid their attacks, because they just run into you. And there's no, like, it's not like there's an attack that you can, like, dodge or juke or something. They just run into you. So what I'm doing there might seem like cheesing. This might seem like it's not what's supposed to happen, but this is the only way you can fight them. Ditto for these weapon masters. Like, you can't fight these guys without Volaticus. Like, you just can't do it. Because that hammer above his head means you can't jump over him. Those two scythe, like, sword throws that he's gonna do cover the entire ground in front of him. And once he takes enough damage, he's gonna freak the fuck out and start spinning around all over the room. And it's like, there, you know, like right there. So first he throws his shit, then he starts spazzing out. And it's like, there's no way to damage him consistently while he's doing that shit, because it means that you can't close any distance. So doing this right here is, and like, look at that shit. You see that, like, fan of knives shit he just did? Like, if you were fighting him on the ground, there's no way you could have dodged that. Short of, like, I don't know, maybe if you got fucking lucky and the knife hit some attack you were doing in front of you. Like, these guys are just fucking impossible to fight. So what Volaticus plus double Globus lets you do, is actually fight them. And it might look like cheesing, and it is, I mean, you could call it that, but you actually do kind of still have to play the game like this. Which is what you can't do when you try to fight them on the ground. You can't fight them on the ground. There's no game to be played if you fight them on the ground. The game that gets played is they run at you and you take 300 damage and you die. But with this right here, it's more like an actual game, because they can still hit you up on the ceiling. That's what that attack he does there when he, like, kicks his legs up into the air. That's him basically trying to hit you on the ceiling. And so you do kind of have to, like, pay attention to what he's doing while he's doing it. And ditto with these weapon masters. Am I actually going to kill them? Wow, okay. See, because the thing about the large cavern is that what I used to do when I first did this is, rather than attack these guys with Globus, I would just sit up on the ceiling with wings and then just fly around and wait for the doors to open. Because like in the Nest of Evil, if you survive in any of these rooms for long enough, the doors will eventually just open on their own. But I guess I decided that was, like, I don't know, not as cool, not as interesting. It'd be more fun to try to, like, actually fight them. And fighting, like, killing the double hammers isn't hard, because it's just a matter of shooting Globus while you're doing what you were doing before, which is just flying back and forth at the top of the screen. But with these weapon masters, the fact that they change their behavior partway through, yeah, like that, actually makes attacking them rather than just waiting them out more of a risky proposition. Because if you never attack them, it's very easy to just avoid their sword throws from up on the ceiling. Whereas at this, I guess I also thought it would be cool to actually kill them. Get some XP, I guess. Get slightly higher level. That's not really a huge concern with me. I'm not really worried about my level for the Dracula fight. This is another, like, real challenge room. Although again, it's very easy. And this is what's funny about the large cavern, is that, like, wow, I'm using all those. Oh, I know why I'm using all those hearts. It's because I'm not going to use any hearts fighting these armor guys, and because I'm not going to use any hearts fighting the mini boss you fight at the end of the large cavern. I'm just going to melee him. So this is actually the hardest. This is actually, like, the trickiest room in the whole cavern, because you have to be, like, strafing back and forth avoiding the hammer guy, but also at any given time, a good chunk of the ceiling is going to be inaccessible because you're risking running into the weapon master's blades if you run into it. Like, basically, whenever he's facing a certain section of the room throwing his swords around, it's really not safe to go over there. And I think I was really hoping that I would have killed the double armor before this guy changed phases, and I barely do. Here, I think I just... Okay, good. I was afraid I was going to get hit there, but I barely got out of the way. He should almost be dead now. Fuck. Okay, this is so scary. Oh my god, why am I not drinking a potion? Oh my god, this is so insane. I think I just leave. I think I decided if he wasn't gonna... No, I stay in and kill him? Oh my god, this is insane. I really hate this guy. I must really want this guy to die. Okay, good, there. Jesus. Am I not gonna... Please tell me I drink a potion for this. Yeah, I had to. Yeah, that was like a situation where... I've actually never taken damage on this mini-boss. I think I did once. So I thought maybe I would go... No, actually I have taken damage on this guy, because what you're supposed to do is block that projectile with your shield, but sometimes if the projectile hits you at like an odd angle, the explosion will just kind of like go through your shield and damage you anyway. So I kind of had to be ready for that. I think that's why I didn't immediately drink a potion, because I wasn't sure, like, can I risk fighting this guy? One hit away from death, but ultimately it just wasn't worth risking. This was such a good run. I got so many of the no damages that I wanted. Absolutely no reason to throw it all away at the last second for no reason. And as you can see, he goes down super easy. Interesting. What that enemy is, by the way, is what they call the Jiangshi. It's some kind of it's like a Chinese like vampire spirit thing, or as the fat lady in the town said, a vampire from the Orient. And I think it has to do with... There's actually kind of an interesting story behind it. It's because... So what the reason they jump around is because that's like the legend from China is these like unquiet corpses that like try to jump back to their graves or something. And the reason that's part of the legend is because... I'm going to explain why I got the winged boots in a second. The reason that's part of the legend is because in China, then as now, I assume, it was considered very important for people who died to be buried with the rest of their family in the same, like, ancestral grave plot. So soldiers who were killed far from home would sometimes be brought all the way back to their hometowns to be buried with the rest of their families. But in order to do that, they had to be carried on these long poles, on these like big long poles up in the air. And so from far away, it looked like these corpses on these poles were like moving up and down because of the pace of the people who were carrying them. So very, very creepy and morbid stuff, but very interesting. So if you ever heard about the Chinese jumping vampires, that's what that's all about. China, you guys, I think if people probably know this, but China is very touchy about like corpses and dead bodies and death, and it's why in Chinese World of Warcraft they can't have bones anywhere or like skulls, because they're just very touchy about it, and they don't it makes them uncomfortable is the idea. Anyway, Chinese culture tangent. This is the training hall. The room that I just got through with the floating platform there was like the hardest room in the whole zone, so I kind of wish I had talked about it a little bit more. Basically, you just have to go super fast, which is why I put on the double mace glyphs and use the double mace glyph union to kill that turret, because you have to catch back up with that platform. If you don't, you are consigned to have to try to walk back to the start of the room again through two of those double hammer enemies, who are, as I've stated before, impossible to fight. And since you can't use Velaticus in here, basically fucking up that first attempt to get on the moving platform is a death sentence. Either you're going to die to them, or if you have a bunch of healing items, you can use a bunch of healing items. I don't have a bunch of healing items. I think I'm down to like one super potion and one high potion. Whatever. The reason I'm attacking, by the way, is because of something that I briefly mentioned before, which is that the emulator had a bad habit of, if I didn't make an input for a long time and then I made an input, it like wouldn't notice it at first. So there have been times before where I've been waiting on that platform for a long time to make a jump, and then I would like input moving and making the jump, and it would do it like too late, wouldn't register that I was doing it when I wanted to do it. So that's why I kept attacking, just to kind of keep keep the emulator awake and keep it aware that yes, I am still here, I'm still playing the game. And this room, okay, so the reason I left and came back in is because this room, I kind of learned like a Dracula's Curse room, which, speaking of which, the music that's playing right now is a remix of the track Riddle, the level 9 music from Dracula's Curse, a track that is burned into my brain due to the nature of level 9 of Dracula's Curse. That room, if you, like... I just kind of learned that room. Like, you walk in and you just go through it as fast as possible, and it actually kind of works out. The rest of this, you don't really need to do that for, but that room, there's, like, so much going on. There's, like, moving platforms and, like, fire turrets and so much shit. You can just get through it. And this part's pretty annoying, because you have to fall down, past some of those moving spike things, and some of them you can see and some of them you can't, like right there. Like there, I think I dive kicked specifically because I was hoping I'd be able to bounce off of the statue that I knew was down there, and then avoid the spike thing that was moving back and forth, but it fucking hit me anyway. I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna go right back to the fucking... to a fucking save station after this. What do I get? Well, okay, that's good. That would have been good to have for the Blackmore fight, actually. But unfortunately, you can't get here until after you fight, Blackmore is the shadow guy in the Caverns. Yeah, the Robe de Colette is, I think, the highest int of any, robe available to you in the game. And what's fucked up is that completing the training hall doesn't guarantee that you get that. You can go all the way through the training hall just to get, like, a fucking, like a super potion at the end. Which is nice and everything, but it's not nearly as good as the robe. So here I'm setting up my glyphs for the Dracula fight. And the reason I got the winged boots is because, number one, I was going to clear out the large cavern anyway, I might as well do the quest that tells you to go do that. Number two, I'm going to be using Volaticus on Dracula. Which, now, I'm not going to be flying around the room shooting projectiles at him the whole time the way that I did to the dudes in the large cavern, because that's not necessary. The Dracula fight is an actual fight you can actually do. And incidentally, the reason why I don't hate the large cavern the way I hate the Nest of Evil is because even though it does have total bullshit in it, like every room involving the double hammers, they also give you a solution. The double Frankenstein room in the Nest of Evil is total bullshit that you are never given a sufficient solution to deal with. But here they give you Volaticus and double Globus, so it's all good. It's all good. It actually turns the game into like a fun little mini game for those two rooms, where now you're like a side-scrolling, laser-shooting fighter jet or something. It's pretty fun. It's different. There's nothing else like that in the whole game. I mean, I think it lasts about as long as it should, but it's a novelty. There he is, the man himself. I like this dialogue here. It has the nice she's saying, I mean, all she's basically expressing is, I will defeat you, and he's basically expressing, this conversation, in terms of its tone, is no different from a lot of conversations between Castlevania protagonists and Dracula. And actually, I have a nitpick. I wish she didn't have an exclamation mark at the end of that last thing she said. Because the idea is that her emotions haven't fully been restored yet, so I think it would be cooler if she was just kind of stating more calmly that she was here to destroy him. I think that'd be cooler. Anyway, Dracula, the man himself, he's here. So, Dracula, as is traditional, has two phases. He has phase 1, where he'll cycle between 3 different attacks. He'll do a fireball attack, he'll do the big magma ball attack, and then he does this attack where he shoots down green stuff. All of these attacks are fairly simple to dodge. Where you can just crouch and destroy the fireballs here. With the magma ball attack, it's a very simple matter of ducking under and jumping over. You might be wondering why not use the Volaticus soul to avoid the magma balls. I think I maybe could have done that, but Dracula really doesn't like it when you use the Volaticus soul. I think he does something that punishes you for that, because I'm sure that I tried it. The only reason I'm not sure is because I do something kind of like that on Albus mode and it doesn't... Well, anyway, generally speaking, if you try to use the Volaticus glyph, Dracula punishes you super hard for it. So you might be wondering why I have it on. Well, I'll show you. It has to do with Phase 2. Phase 1 is just kind of, it's what Phase 1s usually are in Dracula fights, which is just a very stringent and persistent, like, timing check, where there's nothing particularly difficult about dodging any of these attacks. I mean, I guess the Magma Ball attack is kind of tricky to dodge, but what's tricky is really how many times he's asking you to do it. Like, all the way back in Castlevania 1, the way to fight Dracula Phase 1 is just to get the timing down for jumping over his fireballs, but the trick is that you have to do it so many times. Here it's the same thing. And I could be making this phase go faster by hitting him with Glyph Unions, which I think I might start doing, but I really want to save my Glyph Unions for Phase 2, because Phase 2 is pretty scary. It's definitely scarier than Phase 1. And I don't think I'm going to perfectly utilize my Glyph Unions. I think I'm going to end this fight with some hearts. He has, I think, 9999 HP, so this is going to take a while. I think at about the halfway point he goes to Phase 2. Not much more to say than that. Things aren't going to get like interesting and complicated until we get to Phase 2. Actually, there is an interesting thing going on here in Phase 1 where I want to phase him in a particular... I would really like to phase him when he's in the middle doing the Fatal Rain attack. Because the positioning that I'm used to for... Basically, there's an attack he can do in Phase 2 that I want him to never do. It's called Destruction Rain. And the way you stop him from doing it... Okay, now he's in Phase 2. The way you stop him from using Destruction Rain is by staying up in his face and getting him to do that kick attack instead. So this is the basic structure of Phase 2, is he teleports into the middle, starts to do an attack, and then after that attack he'll walk towards you, teleport away, sometimes do that, Soul Steal, and then repeat. But what I'm doing here is I'm actually canceling out the attack that he does when he goes into the middle of the room by quickly activating and then immediately deactivating Velaticus, because activating Velaticus triggers that line of fire pillars you saw come out of the floor, which what that's supposed to do is immediately knock you out of the sky and punish you for using Velaticus to make sure that you can't dodge out of the attacks that he uses when he teleports into the middle of the room, of which there are two, and they're both pretty tricky to dodge, especially one of them. He can either summon bats or summon dogs, both very hard, but by doing that Velaticus thing, he will use the fire pillar attack instead and like cancel out the attack that he was in the process of doing first. So I'm basically using the boss fight's safety features against it, because the reason they try to punish you for using Velaticus is to make sure that you have to interact with those attacks, but if you don't actually jump and fly around, if you just trigger it on the ground, it still activates the fire pillar attack, and the fire pillar attack will override the bat/dog attack that he was trying to do before, and then he just goes into either kicking you or destruction raining. So as long as I'm close enough to him after he finishes doing the fire pillar attack that he won't use Destruction Rain, I can make him do basically the same thing every time, which is kick, soul steal, go to the middle, do nothing, kick, soul steal, etc. And so I just cycle through the fight like that. And at the end there, you do have to actually use the Dominus Glyph Union to kill Dracula, a wonderful little merger of gameplay and story, which I really appreciate. I always like it when games take things that like you could have done in the cutscene and make you do them yourself in the game. And if you didn't quite understand like my explanation of the Dracula fight, it's hard to explain without seeing how the fight is supposed to go. But if you watch when I upload Albus mode footage, Albus doesn't have Velaticus. Albus has to actually do the fight normally. So you'll see how it's kind of supposed to go in that footage. To compare the two. Speaking of Albus, he's back. This part also doesn't really make that much sense, but I'm willing to accept that it's not really about the specific details, it's about the emotions being conveyed. There's interesting stuff going on here thematically with kind of the nature of Dracula contrasting with the nature of Albus and Shanoa. Where Shanoa knows at this point in the story that using Dominus would kill her. So when she does that, she's accepting that she's basically willing to die to stop Dracula. And the thing about Dracula that always struck me is that the way the character is portrayed, so to speak, is that you get the impression that he would probably be incapable of doing anything for anyone else. What does Alucard say? You were defeated as soon as you lost the ability to love. That's kind of the idea of the whole downfall of Dracula. So because Shanoa is willing to sacrifice herself, because Albus now is willing to sacrifice himself, it's like that's why they're able to defeat Dracula. I think it's a cool thematic thing. I don't know if they necessarily put that much thought into it, but that's what I got out of it. It's about self-sacrifice. It's about sacrificing yourself for others. It's about love versus hate, essentially. And incidentally, so this is why I think Albus is funny as a character, because he seems like a character who is like specifically designed to appeal to the female audience, because this is cool. This is what I said. I don't know if I said this. I think I said this in the description of my uncommentated video. Like, Order of Ecclesia's story manages to sort of condense everything into one really powerful image, and it's that image of Shanoa smiling and crying at the same time. That's really, like, evocative. It's really powerful. Anyway, yeah, Albus seems like he's specifically designed to appeal to, like, the female audience, because he's a total, like, smug asshole the whole time, but secretly everything he was doing was to help and protect Shanoa. So it's like, I don't know, I might be making a little bit of a generalization there, but I know a thing or two about shoujo manga, so I know what I'm talking about when I talk about the kinds of male characters that female audience members seem to gravitate towards. Anyway, that's the game. That's Order of Ecclesia. I mean, what can I say? It's the best of the DS trilogy. It's the best Metroidvania in the series. Better than Symphony of the Night. Better than Harmony of Dissonance. Better than Aria of Sorrow. Just kind of a standout in so many ways. You know, there are a couple, like I said before, there are a couple of glitches. There are a couple of little tiny imperfections. The water levels are a bad idea. Excuse me. Excuse me again. Sorry. The way in which glyphs are divvied out is not really the best. It's kind of like you spend the first... I think there's too much time spent in the first part of the game where you don't really have that many tools. And also, to be totally consistent, because this is something that I gave a lot of shit to Aria and Dawn of Sorrow about, there are some glyphs you can only get as random drops from enemies, and those percentages are very low. The hammer guys, like I only got 2 hammer glyphs there. I got Macer and then Vol Macer. Melio Macer is a random drop from the hammer guys, and I have played this game, like, so many times, I've never seen it drop. I've never, ever... Melio Askia is also a random drop from the skeleton guys, with the big skeleton guys with the big axes. I've never seen it drop. Not once. Melio Sakare, I think, is a drop from the ruler swords. Again, never seen it drop. Not a single time. So, I feel like they really dodged a bullet there, where they made Melio Hasta available by default, and that's kind of why it works out, because the Lance glyph is, in my opinion, the best weapon glyph. So it kind of works out, but it's like they dodged a bullet there. Like, if they had given you Melio Sakari by default and then made Melio Hasta like a random drop, I feel like that would be, that would have been a problem. If the quest rewards had been, like, more impactful and, like, forced you to do more tedious quests, that would have been a problem. So it's like this wonderful balancing act that it does, I think partially unintentionally, where nothing is super obnoxious, nothing is really a huge problem. None of the things that could have been huge issues ultimately end up being huge issues. And, you know, whether it was deliberate or not, whether they went into it with thoughts of, we don't want to make the player feel like they have to do these quests, We don't want to make the player feel like they have to farm to get the best weapons. Whether they did that on purpose or not, or if that was just how it worked out, the end result is the same, is that the game does not have any totally annoying shit in it. You don't have to farm, you don't have to really do anything but just play the fucking game, and it's a really good game. So, and then on top of that, not only does it not have any huge glaring problems, but it's ambitious in terms of its storyline. It's ambitious in terms of its concept. Like I said, going back to like Simon's Quest is a really, really interesting decision to do, to sort of like iterate on that and kind of like fix that idea. And I don't really mind the anime art style. A lot of people seem to have problems with like the anime art style in later Castlevania games. I don't mind it, but I do really... So I'm not saying that the fact that this doesn't have the same kind of anime art style as Portrait of Ruin is something that I was saying, oh, thank God, and no more anime shit. No, I don't really care. I just like stuff that looks good, and I think Order of Ecclesia looks really, really good. I don't think I would have minded either way, but I think I do like the visuals in Order of Ecclesia better than Portrait of Ruin. I think some of the quasi 3D, like big golem-looking guys, like the Frankenstein monsters, those are a little bit goofy looking. Same with the Phase 2 of Dracula. I can't help it. At this point in the series, I'm a little bit disappointed whenever Dracula doesn't turn into a big goofy monster in Phase 2. But oh well, that ended up creating a really mechanically interesting fight. Anyway, both the way that I played it, kind of like fucking with it in Shanoa, and then also the way that it actually plays, which you'll see in Albus mode. So it all works out ultimately. It's kind of like Albus working behind the scenes to fix everything. It's like at the end, everything turns out fine. That's Order of Ecclesia. Everything turns out more than fine. Everything turns out excellent. So that's Order of Ecclesia. Hope you all enjoyed. I will see you guys soon with some hard mode footage, and keep on Earth rockin'.